Welcome to the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. I'm Terry Dennis, the chair. With us today we have Daryl Harrison, Terry Jensen, Dana Scorapad, substituting for Steve Bonk is Travis Kiesick, and for Greg Lawrence is Hugh Nerlin. And we have Trent Weatherspoon substituting for Erica Ritchie. Because we are implementing measures to facilitate the safety in context with COVID-19 pandemic, if the minister needs to confer privately during the proceedings, she may do so in the hallway, the vestibule, or at the front of the chambers, or in the hallway. And as a reminder, please don't touch the microphones. Hansard operator will turn your microphone on when you are speaking to the committee. If you have any questions or about logistics or documents to table, the committee requests that you contact the clerk at committees@assembly.sk.ca. Contact information is provided on the witness table. We will now be considering the estimates and supplement estimates number 2 for the Ministry of Finance. This includes vote 195, advances to resolving funds, vote 175, debt redemption, vote 18, finance, vote 12, finance debt servicing, vote 177, interest on gross debt, Crown Enterprise share, vote 151, municipal financing corporation, vote 176, sinking funds payments, government share. We will begin with vote 18, central management and services, subvote FI01. Minister Harper is here with her officials. Welcome, and please introduce your officials and make your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I have my Deputy Minister of Finance, Ruben Pandya, with me today, along with a number of officials tuning in remotely. The Ministry of Finance estimates, volume 18, appear on pages 57 to 61 of the estimates book. The Ministry of Finance's expense budget for 2021-22 is $368.2 million, a decrease of $103.4 million, or 21.9% from 2020-21. The difference between the 2020-21 and the 2021-22 budgets can be primarily attributed to a decrease in the COVID-19 program support. The programs in place last year supported Saskatchewan residents and businesses through the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the programs introduced last year were wound down as health orders and restrictions were lifted. However, as we continue through the year, circumstances can change. The pandemic is unpredictable, and we are committed to supporting Saskatchewan people. Other increases to our ministry's budget include the following: $10.7 million for pensions and benefits, $161,000 for salary adjustments resulting from the approved collective bargaining agreement, $450,000 increase to address impending pressure for the number and amount of write-offs for uncollectible accounts due to the economic impacts of COVID-19, $390,000 increase in general operating expenses to support or to continue supporting Midas while the enterprise business modernization project is developed, and $55,000 for a government-wide adjustment to enterprise IT billing, and $8,000 for the role of the Deputy Premier and a statutory increase to the minister's salary. Mr. Chair has mentioned the notable reductions in Finance Ministry's expense budget compared to last year include $56 million for the Saskatchewan Temporary Wage Supplement Program, $50 million for the Small Business Emergency Payment Program, $12.6 million for Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, and $2 million for the Saskatchewan Self-Isolation Support Program. The Ministry's 2021-22 budget also includes $1.4 million in government-owned capital, a decrease of $1.6 million from 2020-21. The $1.4 million is for the real-time validation system used to validate and process tax-exempt fuel and tobacco sales from retail stores on First Nations in Saskatchewan. The following is the annual operational highlights for the Ministry of Finance. Each year, the Finance Ministry produces about 275,000 payments to suppliers, grant recipients, employees, and for government programs and supports, about 10,000 financial system users. The Ministry of Finance also provides services to more than 100,000 business clients annually through tax revenue, refund, and incentive programs. Approval of financial statements for 131 government agencies, which are to be tabled within 120 days of the fiscal year end of each agency. The tabling deadline is now met by 98% of those agencies, reflecting steady progress achieved over the past 14 years compared to a low of 76% in 2006-07. Each year, the Ministry effectively forecasts and manages the government's cash and debt requirements, produces budget reviews, estimates, and quarterly fiscal reports, and publishes Ministry, agency, and Treasury Board Crown plans and annual reports, all within the respective deadlines. Throughout the year, the Ministry also provides advice to the Subcommittee on Public Sector Bargaining for the 38 collective bargaining agreements, as well as the agreement with the Saskatchewan Medical Association. In addition, advice is provided to government on compensation matters for out-of-scope employment. Throughout the year, the Ministry also collects taxation revenue for government and ensures compliance with tax programs using risk-based audit and enforcement activities. In addition, PIBA, the Public Employee Benefits Agency within the Ministry of Finance, administers a dozen pension plans for more than 102,000 members and more than 900 employers, as well as 23 benefit plans for more than 89,000 member accounts. The Ministry of Finance played a central role in delivering temporary financial relief programs to workers and businesses as part of the Government of Saskatchewan's response to the COVID-19 emergency. Each of these programs was up and running and helping Saskatchewan people within days of being approved by the Government of Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Payment provided financial assistance to small businesses that had been ordered to temporarily close or significantly curtail operations during the public emergency period due to a public health order to help control transmission of COVID-19. The Saskatchewan Temporary Wage Supplement Program helped thousands of workers who were helping Saskatchewan's most vulnerable citizens through the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Chair, that touches on the important work that the people of Saskatchewan Ministry of Finance undertake throughout the year. With that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Minister. I'll open it up to questions. Minister Weatherspoon.
I liked your first characterization better, but thank you very much, Minister. Thank you to officials that are here tonight, and thank you to all of the officials that are connecting to the work here tonight, and for all their work through what's been an unprecedented challenge this year, and one that continues. So I appreciate that. Maybe I'll start first just focusing a bit on some of the COVID related programs that are administered through finance. Some of them have been, there's been some remarks to them by the minister in the opening remarks, but these would all be in the subvote F108. And my question would be, I guess, first of all, of course, we see the expenditure for the fiscal 2021 that's there. A lot of those programs have gone to the budget this year is nil for most of those programs, with the exception, I guess, the Sask Tourism program has a budget there. I'm wondering what the explanation is for basically no budget in the current fiscal.
I'll begin, and then perhaps my Deputy Minister might want to add more. I'm not sure. So the wage top-up program is depleted. The money has been expensed, and we won't be continuing that program. We had anticipated with the small business, I should get the right name for it. Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Support Program we had anticipated would not carry into this fiscal year. However, we have announced an additional month of that program. And I'll return to that. The Saskatchewan Tourism Sector Program, Support Program, we had included, believe it was $5 million in this budget in anticipation of the timing of applicants. However, it is looking like we won't be using all of those funds, so we're going to take what will be remaining and we will move it into the additional month of the small business or the Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Support Program. Should there not be enough within that allocation for an additional month of the Small Business Emergency Support Program, we will have to do a special warrant after, and you will see that reflected in the first quarter report.
Thanks for the information. What about the Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program?
Program was basically a federal program, so what we had allocated was the anticipated provincial portion of what was a federal program. I'll have to defer to my deputy minister to say whether that was all expensed, even what we had budgeted.
Thanks. So for 2021, there was $12.6 million allocated to the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. You'll recall that when the Government of Canada initially released that program, they had put in place provisions for there to be a contribution from both landlords, or pardon me, from tenants, and then landlords would also have to take a reduction in terms of rent. The first phase of that program proved to be, I'll let the minister speak to that, but it was very challenging, and so the Government of Canada came back and essentially rewrote that program halfway through. So there's $12.6 million allocated in 2021 to the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance.
Did we expense any of it?
Yeah, I'll get that number for you right away.
So while my deputy minister looks up how much we expensed, if you recall, when the federal government first announced this program, they were saying that the landlord had to forego, or basically bear some of the cost of giving a rent relief to lessees or renters. Myself, along with a number of other provinces, said this is not going to work. It was Minister Monod at the time, because there's no way we can obligate. We have no legal way of making a landlord participate. He was quite adamant that it would work. It didn't. It failed miserably. So it was changed shortly after Minister Freeland came in.
I appreciate that. Sorry, I see the Deputy Minister. I know we advocated directly. I think we've actually had an exchange on this as well, and I wrote Morneau as well on that front. The program as designed initially wasn't practical and required the landlord to really do all of the acting on that front, and it was preventing many tenants from receiving the benefit that they needed. Deputy Minister, I believe you had some information.
Yeah. So the federal government kind of rolled together both that first phase of the program and the second phase of the program. So I'll just share with you kind of the final statistics on the program. So there was a program provided $26.2 million in benefits to 1,071 Saskatchewan landlords in support of 1,837 small businesses with 16,298 employees. Saskatchewan's share of the program costs, including the program administration, was $6.756 million.
Thanks for that information. With respect to the wage supplement for the low-income workers, I guess my question is, why isn't that program continuing through this very challenging time right now? We're really in the grips of one of the most challenging periods that we've gone through with COVID, and the risks and the demands for those workers are really have been more real than ever in this current fiscal year thus far. We hope, of course, that there's going to be some light on this front, and that we're going to obviously get through this at some point. But what was the rationale for not continuing to provide that support for those low-wage workers that are doing such critical work at this time?
So again, this was a federally announced program, and just to go back a bit, what happened, and in the beginning of when a pandemic was declared and different provinces were being impacted over time. So if you remember, I think we all did, because I think we all were quite shocked at what happened in Quebec, where they had a number of nursing homes or long-term care homes where the employees walked off, leaving the residents in the home, and the reason why was because they were being paid less than CERB. And so that alarmed the federal government at the time, and the federal government announced that there was going to be a wage top-up program available to each of the provinces. And I'm just going to read into the record what the Prime Minister had to say at the time, and he said, and I quote, in recognition that these essential worker salaries are often less or similar than what they would receive from CERB, the government will work with the provinces and territories through a new transfer to cost share a temporary top-up to the salaries of workers deemed essential in the fight against COVID-19 who make less than $2,500 a month. Details as to the application and delivery of this measure will be released shortly, following further work with the provinces and territories. So we had available to us in Saskatchewan, and I'm going to just get a nod from I believe it was 52.3 million was the allocation from the federal government for Saskatchewan, and I mean the province they would give additional dollars over and above that if the province participated in a large portion of the cost of it. In response, we, had thought about, the intent of this, and in checking with SHA as to how many workers in SHA to address the healthcare crisis that it was intended for, and the incident that happened in Quebec, I was virtually told that there was few to none of our workers that make less than $2,500 a month. So that then became a bit of a problem of how we could use the money that the federal government was offering. So we did an initial phase of the program where we said we would top up wages for a number of areas of places where they were looking at after the most vulnerable. And in the initial stages, of course, it was very, very, very obvious the most vulnerable were our seniors in the long-term care. And without knowing, because some is delivered through community-based or partners, we don't know how many employees they have or what they get paid. There are some level 1 and 2 care homes that, again, they're not government run, and we don't know how many employees they have or what they get paid. So we made the offer of $400 a month top up to workers who earned less than $24 an hour in the 4-week period. And we included the eligibility of public and private senior care homes, community-based group and personal care homes, licensed child care facilities, emergency shelters, transition shelters, integrated healthcare facilities, and home care workers providing care to seniors in their own homes. We put that application to the federal government. They approved it and said that we were indeed directing the money to where they intended. We had money left over. So then we basically did a phase 2, more focused on the seniors and the workers that live in the assisted living facilities, the long-term care and private care and home care, and did another phase of the program. And the last money then was used by the SHA because they have done a very successful job of ensuring that employees were cohorted and not working in more than one home. Part of the rationale between with the long-term care is that there was a complete shutdown of visitors that were allowed to go to the long-term care. As most of us have loved ones in long-term care facilities, we know intimately that visitors are quite important to what happens in long-term care. I know myself, I would take my loved one out for an afternoon, or at the very least sit with them, sometimes help with meals, etc., and that could no longer happen. So it really did go on to the workload of the workers. So that's why that sector was not only included in the first phase of the program availability, but also for the second. The other thing that we did was, for the long-term care, we took the ceiling cap off, and anybody who worked there qualified.
Thanks for the information, and I understand that the second phase was more inclusive of in who it captured or supported as far as workers. It seemed to me by my assessment, but it still excluded quite a few workers that worked in hospitals and that worked in CBOs and that worked for Canada Blood Services, for example. I guess I'm looking for the rationale as to why those workers were shut out.
The intent that we felt from the federal government initially, but for our program in particular and how we designed it, was to utilize the federal money, and I get that it was distorting it. It was a very strange program, actually. Was for those that had their workload significantly changed because of the reasons that I said, where visitors were restricted. So it was home care, long-term care with our seniors in particular, and there was health orders that didn't allow visitors to go in, and there was restrictions for the seniors that were basically couldn't have visitors in their home to care for them in the same manner, so it was to cover the home care. Had we included all healthcare workers across the line, then we would have needed an additional approximately $80 million, so significant. At the same time, we're also having support programs for businesses who literally were shut down and employees who weren't sure that they had a job at all. So you kind of weigh the significant impact and still being fiscally responsible that, you know, we have a number of people that lost their jobs throughout this pandemic, or at the very least lost their jobs for a time period, and their salary was taken right down to CERB. Whereas our healthcare workers, and I, by no means, completely respect, I used to be one, the work that they do, but I know as a lab tech, a visitor coming in and out didn't help me. In fact, it would be kind of a nuisance if they were coming into the lab. And so the work day didn't change significantly. I was assured a wage, or would be assured a wage through the pandemic. Should we add all healthcare workers, it would have been between $80 and $100 million additional dollars we would have needed provincially.
It's just, it's a difficult situation, obviously, to design a program, but just some of the folks that have been described that were shut out, working in childcare throughout this time, and with significant risks, but so essential to families and to workers and to those working in healthcare, as well as folks in group homes and working in crisis intervention and Canada Blood Services. It really does seem that there was a large number of workers who really were at risk, going the extra mile, essential to the COVID response in a holistic sense, but that were shut out. I'm interested just in the programs that so all of the programs that we're looking at here, the temporary wage supplement for lower income essential workers, the small business emergency payment, the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, the self-isolation support. Out of the 2020, so the 2020-21, the previous fiscal, out of the dollars that were spent there, they're detailed in the budget here, of course, what percentage of those dollars, or what was the total value of the federal contribution or the federal input on that front?
Before I answer the dollar question, and I know, I believe education estimates have already been done. In the, for the child care centers, they got not one but two payments through the, I'm trying to remember the program, but it was also a federal program, and there was
Federal Safe Restart.
Safe Restart program. They got two payments out of there as well. So they were included in the first phase of the wage top-up, plus they got money two separate times after the fact. So they did get additional dollars. For the wage top-up, as I said earlier, the federal money that went into that program was $52.3 million. For the Small Business Emergency Support Program, $0. For the Saskatchewan Tourism Support Program, $0. For the Education Emergency Pandemic Support Program, it was entirely federal? No. No.
40 million of contingency, Minister, plus there's 40 million of Board of Education funding, and then the remainder was federal funding.
So 40 million came from the provincial contingency fund. Oh, that's the Education Emergency Pandemic Support. Yeah, so 40 million came out of the contingency fund that we had in the budget. 40 million came from the school division savings, and the remainder, 75 million, came from the federal government. For the Saskatchewan Self-Isolation Program, which was the program that we introduced right in the very initial 2 weeks of the pandemic to cover wages for people that had to self-isolate, and then the federal government introduced a program, so that kind of made ours redundant. There was no federal money in there. So to summarize, in the Education Emergency Pandemic Support Program, there was 75 million from the federal government. And for the Saskatchewan Temporary Wage Supplement Program, there was 53.2, and there was no federal money in any of the other programs.
Yeah, thanks for the information. And the federal contributions were fully exhausted in the previous fiscal year, correct? So there was no unspent federal dollars on those fronts. What about the commercial rent assistance program? Sorry, could you just touch that program again? Is that a cost?
Cost shared. I didn't bring in my stats on that, so I would defer to my Deputy Minister on that program.
Sure, I'll just try to track down the relevant statistic for you, but let's see here. So as I indicated earlier, the program was 12.6 million and the provincial share was 6.756 million. Again, that was the phase one program, but as I indicated earlier, the program morphed into a federal-only program. And then I think I already shared in the record the total contributions by the federal government as part of that second phase of the program. So I think that there was something in the neighborhood. I'm just trying to recall if it was 26 million or 21 million. I'll just get that number for you.
I believe.
26 million benefits to Saskatchewan businesses, yeah.
Thanks for that information. I know that we've been clear with our concerns over the program design around the small business emergency payment program and how it's shut out too many businesses that need and deserve support at this critical time. But as I understand, I know we've taken that up directly. I think the program design was over with the economy minister is my understanding. I know our critic has been very clear with that minister. I just want to make sure I'm on the record pushing that, we're not out of the woods yet. And of course, you've responded that there's going to be an appropriation for the business program in this fiscal, whether or not the dollars are there that are within the tourism program or whether there needs to be some additional dollars. What I would urge is that we really need to make sure that we have those supports out there right now, and certainly to the economy minister and your voice with him. That program's been too restrictive to date, and we need to make sure the supports are out there. I guess one question, and maybe this is the kind of question that maybe folks can bring the information back to the committee at some point, but for each of those respective programs, would it be fair to have provided back to us as a committee how many applicants there were for each, how many were approved, how many were rejected, and we have the total spend, so we don't need that because we have that. So how many applicants, how many approved, how many rejected? If you have it on the ready, I'd take it right now. Otherwise, I'm quite comfortable to receive it in the coming days.
Because I have the wage supplement here. I don't have the approved and rejected, but I have the breakdown that you might find interesting on the wage top-up of where they worked. So there was 28,876 payments made for special care homes. There was 19,565 payments made that were integrated facilities, so special care home, acute care, and healthcare centers where it's integrated. There was 8,212 payments made to personal care homes, 1,760 payments made to licensed child care centers, 1,546 payments made to CLSD group homes and CLSD group living homes. There was 1,210 payments made to home care services. There was 987 payments made to unlicensed assisted living. 653 payments made to private service homes or approved homes. 493 payments made to CFP group homes. 154 payments made to, it just says group homes, so I'm not sure, they're not labeled as to what type of group home. 130 payments made to CFP short-term community-based homes. 116 payments made to crisis response and other specialized group homes. 110 payments made to emergency shelters. 95 payments made to mental health group homes and supported living homes. 93 payments to domestic violence shelters. 23 payments to unlicensed daycares. 9 payments to CLSD group living home. There's 9 additional payments made to emergency youth shelter, 7 payments to transition shelter, and 6 payments to supported family living, for a total number of payments of $64,039. So that was the first phase, and the amount that was expensed in that phase was $25,615,600.
Good. This is all really good information. I'm wondering if some of this could be profiled, wanting to make sure that we have just the sense of the number of applicants, the number that were approved, number rejected, and certainly this is all really this information is all really helpful as well. It could certainly come along with that information if possible.
Thank you for the question. I'll just provide summary level data then. So Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Program Phase 1, there was 8,792 applications received, 2,307 applications were denied. All the denials were based on violations of the program criteria. The approved applications were 6,485 for a total amount paid of $32,063,000. I'll just 63,040 if you'd like the full number. The approval percentage was 70.64%. The denial percentage was 29.36%. For SBEP Phase 2, there was 3,831 applications received. This is the Saskatchewan Small Business Emergency Program.
Phase 2,
second
gotcha,
phase. Yeah. 3,831 applications received, 1,231 denied, 2,567 approved. The approval rate was 71.91%, the denial rate 28.19%. Just moving on to the tourism support program. 945, under phase 1, 945 applications received, 184 denied, 761 approved, 85.37% approval rate, 14.63% denial rate. The second phase of that program, Saskatchewan Tourism Support Program, there was 924 applications received, 116 denied, 755 approved, 81.71% was the approval rate, 12.55% was the denial rate. The Saskatchewan Temporary Wage Supplement Program, so the minister read into record the detail on that phase 1 program, but the high-level summary statistics are 79,227 applications were received, 15,188 were denied, 64,039 were approved. The approval rate was 80.83%, and the denial rate was 19.17%. For the second phase of the Saskatchewan Temporary Wage Supplement Program, there was 24,100 applications received, 3,199 denied, 20,901 approved. The approval rate was 87.72% and 12.28% denial. And the Saskatchewan Isolation Support Program, there was 4,232 applications received, 2,097 that were denied, 2,135 that were approved. The approval rate was 50.45% and the denial rate was 49.55%. And I got the summary total for all the programs if you'd like, member, I don't know. So applications received 107,559, denied 20,484, approved 87,075. The approval rate across all programs 80.96%, and the denial rate was 19.04%.
Having the information available here tonight, and I'll maybe move along to other focuses within the estimates, but just leaving on the record that, of course, the support for small businesses is critical right now, and to express concern that that many workers that certainly were working with significant strain and challenges and pressures were shut out of the top-up program. I'd like to move along just a little bit to the borrowing program of government. Obviously, this was a very heavy borrowing program in this budget. And I guess I'm looking for a bit of an update on that borrowing program, including the sources of borrowing and the country, any swap arrangements that are occurring.
Details I think you're looking for. I will turn it over to my deputy minister. But before I do that, I just want to add that it has shown through this time period more than ever the importance of the credit rating, the strong credit rating that we have. I don't think I can remember in my time being involved in this job of ever being able to borrow at a, albeit very slight, less interest rate than Ontario, and consistently we've been able to borrow at a lower interest rate than Alberta. So our strong credit rating position has done well. It's in allowing us to borrow at relatively low interest rates. With that, I'll get the details on our borrowing plan from our Deputy Minister.
Member, maybe I could just start, just because your question was a large question, I'll just start with an overview of debt, and then if you had specific questions, I appreciate you asked a very specific question about if there was international borrowing that occurred. There was one international borrowing that we facilitated. It was a 115 million euro deal, so it translated to 180 million Canadian. That's completely swapped, so we're protected against exchange rate. And we did that to ensure that we were getting competitive rates with respect to our entire domestic borrowing program. So that was the only international issuance that occurred in 2021. In total, at March 31st, 2021, public debt is 23.596 billion. And moving into 21-22 end of fiscal, we'll see public debt at 27.776 billion, which will be a 4.2 billion increase. That's principally, of course, to drive both revenue and program expense shortfalls due to COVID-19 and to fund the provincial capital program, both in executive government and in Crown corporations. All right, I got it right here. So then just to break that down a little bit further for you, for 2021 budget, the operating debt is 9.4 billion. Saskatchewan capital plan debt is 8.142 billion, and other government service organization debt is 3.4 billion. So for GSO debt of a combined 17.855 billion and government business enterprise debt of 9.9 billion. Again, that totals to the 27.7663 billion that I spoke to earlier. And I don't know if there's other elements of the question that I haven't answered that you asked, remember?
Did you touched on the some of the foreign borrowing and the swap component there? Can you describe or profile the term structure and coupons for both Crown corporations and the GRF? Information. I'm also interested in what amount the Bank of Canada may have taken on or purchased of Saskatchewan debt, and what the in the year 2020, this past year, and what term and coupon rates attached there if they purchased Saskatchewan debt.
Okay.
Member, we can get you that information regarding the total, the coupon in the Crown Corporation GRF debt. If you'll just give us a few moments, we'll be able to get that for you.
Okay.
While we're waiting to kind of get the technical answer you asked. So in general, our borrowing program minister is, or probably member is aligned with the type of borrowing that we're doing. So for example, if we're borrowing for operating funding because of COVID-19, that's a short-term, those would be short-term instruments. Typically the benchmarks would be 5 and 10 year. We'll even go shorter term. We'll borrow in floating rate term markets on a shorter term basis as well. And for capital borrowing, we'll typically go longer term depending on the life cycle of that asset. So that's typically when we're moving to 10, 20, and then ultra longs as well. And so our borrowing program is geared to the nature of the borrowing. So any sort of deficit borrowing related to pandemic would be short-term borrowing. We retired almost all, because we also, as part of our annual borrowing program, are doing refinancing as well. We've retired all of our high interest rate debt over the course of the last number of years. And so our highest rate coupon right now, I think, is 9.5%, and that's going to be coming due soon. So of course, with ultra low rates, right now, I believe our 10-year benchmark for Saskatchewan is 2.187. That's about 68 basis points higher than Government of Canada benchmark on the 10-year benchmark. And for 30-year, it's about 2.849%, and that's about a 70 basis point difference from Government of Canada. So, so because rates are extremely low, as we enter into additional refinancing, we'll be actually reducing the interest on any existing debt.
Information, I can scratch out the next question I had around the refinancing. Okay.
Coupon last year was 1.5% on new debt, and the available term of borrowing last year was 12.6 years.
All nationals, all subnational governments have heavy borrowing programs this year. Certainly our province has a very, heavy borrowing program here this year. I guess what's the backup plan if we run into a challenging global situation as far as liquidity right now?
Again, I'll address some of this, and then my deputy minister can add on. It was extremely important when the pandemic was, when it was announced that we were indeed in a global pandemic, and there was lockdowns happening, not just in our own country, but around the world. There was a short time period where nobody was basically buying the bonds, their borrowing was very difficult. That was where we were sitting on well over $1 billion in cash at that point because of difficult decisions, and you have brought up the decisions we made a number of times and questioned them, and they were difficult decisions, but nonetheless, it did put us in a situation going into a pandemic where we were very, very solid financially. We not only had revenues coming in that was higher than our expenses at that time, but we had a lot of cash. And so that was extremely important on those first few months of the pandemic before it started, things started to move again on the borrowing side. It was why Manitoba made the call, quite frankly, for Canada to allow the provinces to borrow. We basically have not borrowed from the Bank of Canada because our bonds are desirable on the market. What would you like to add?
Just that during the first part of the pandemic, there was so much uncertainty. You'll recall in those early days, member, that, financial markets, economists, provincial governments, national governments simply couldn't model what was, a once-in-a-generation event. Since that time, we saw normal functioning return to capital markets. So in the, during those first a month or so, there was a lot of concern with respect to liquidity. The minister's right, because Treasury Board has put in a liquidity policy that's now some $750 million to $1.25 billion of cash. It maintains our operations and saves us from kind of predatory borrowing in short-term markets, or if markets were stalled like they were during the first part of the pandemic. You'll know the Bank of Canada introduced a bond purchase program, so they're buying in the secondary market. So we're not borrowing from them. They're buying bonds just like any investor would buy bonds. And so they had that program up and running, and it restored a healthy functioning in capital markets fairly quickly. And we continue to see that. They've stepped down that program, you'll know. So we have, again, a very healthy liquidity policy, even going into this current, in the current fiscal year, because of it's typically our liquidity levels are around $750 million. So we're almost at double that for the current fiscal year, just in case. So you never want to say never, but I think what's happened is everybody, globally, capital markets, everyone has learned from the first phase of the pandemic. And I think you now see a more healthy functioning of markets, and they've priced in the risk of that into the current program. So us tripping into another global liquidity issue. Certainly we won't at the provincial level, at least over a 6-month period.
Appreciate the information. Certainly, it's just concerning seeing the rapid accumulation of provincial debt, and just with some questions and potential volatility in the world around us on these fronts around the pressures on liquidity. I appreciate the responses and the policy that that you've laid out that you feel as satisfies a level of protection for Saskatchewan on this front, but it's certainly still a concern. I appreciate the attention that's being given to this front. Now, Moody's has given us a negative outlook, and I'm just wondering if they move from there, and I hope not, but if they move from there to a downgrade, what sort of impacts do we have fiscally and as far as access to markets?
So before I begin, and you're right, you're correct, everyone's taken on enormous debt. Saskatchewan now will have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the country, albeit not probably where any of us would like it to be. We haven't got the final ratings from the various credit rating agencies, and it's always a concern if they all downgrade. Will it then impact the interest rates that we can borrow at? And we don't know that yet. We don't have all of their final reports and final evaluations.
Although we started trading tighter to Canada after our budget. That means
the
credit markets. Oh.
That's way too technical for me.
Thanks. So just as some information, so we started trading tighter to Canada, so closer to their rate of borrowing after the budget was released here. And matter of fact, traded on par with Ontario. Ontario issues one of the largest portfolios of debt, even though they have a lower rating because they are so active in markets, they get preferential rate. And so we started to trade through Ontario for the first time since 2018. So that's been really positive. The risk of, so again, the minister's also already answered the question with respect to credit rating agencies. We've already met with Moody's and S&P, and they've, we've shared with them the detailed metrics of our budgets, and we'll wait and see what their reports will be. Typically, what I would tell you, though, member, is that markets or the credit rating agencies, or pardon me, the markets will already have factored into their purchase of debt. They will have already factored in their perception of our credit rating. So you'll know we have the second highest credit rating in Canada, and the lowest net debt to GDP. So they'll look at those overall metrics in determining, what kind of coupon they're willing to take. And so, as I noted, post-budget, we actually started trading tighter rather than longer. So it remains to be seen what Moody's and S&P ultimately provide as a kind of further guidance. But, you know, you'd made a comment earlier, and again, this is just, it's every subnational, it's every government is in the same boat. And so from a relative perspective, the entire, you know, the boat's taken on water. And so, you know, there's a question to rating agencies of what are they going to do in that context, because everybody can't be a bad credit. There was always a dimension of relativity, if you will, in terms of ratings. And so that will continue to play a part, I think, going forward as well.
At what point would a downgrade really start to affect the cost of borrowing?
Markets will have already priced in advance of a downgrade. They will have already priced in what the impacts would be. So, you know, if it was 2 to 5 basis points, it'd be about $2 to $3 million in incremental borrowing costs per year. So I don't know how to answer that question other than giving you the data of what the impact would look like.
The question around the situation with the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation and the accumulated surplus that the government borrows. And we're talking about a very serious, sizable amount of dollars at this point, with a significant surplus on top of the required dollars actuarially to satisfy the program and make sure that it has the reserves that it requires. I think we're around $2.2 billion right now that the province, in essence, is borrowing at this point. Can, I guess, just looking at to ensure that I have the right number here.
I'm not sure we're clear. Are you talking about the consolidated offset balance concentration? Is that what you're asking about?
So the Crop Insurance Corporation has the $2.2 billion of dollars that are accumulated, that are in essence borrowed by the government at the lowest borrowing rate possible, is my understanding.
It's all in the summary financial statement, so it's all included.
Right. No, so I understand that. I guess my question is, so the $2.2 billion, is that the amount that's there right now?
It's $2.8 billion.
2.8 billion. Why does the province use the shortest term interest rate with respect to these dollars that are, you know, in essence, producers' dollars?
So these funds, again, and I don't know if in the Ministry of Agriculture committee, if you have had the opportunity to talk about the consolidated offset balance concentration, but it's a process whereby the Royal Bank of Canada consolidates all the banking accounts of government and all the government entities. And so, so we are able to use those funds as short-term funds rather than borrowing those funds, and we provide interest as part of, the Minister indicated there's full disclosure in summary financial statements on the amount of interest we provide. Your question is about the term of the interest, and because those funds are insurance funds, they would have to invest in short-term, high-quality liquid assets so that they can convert those assets as quickly as possible to cash. And so we're just following the same kind of accounting requirement that those funds would be required the type of assets that those funds would would have to be involved. Invested in. So that I think answers your question. The interest paid to SCIC in 2021 is $4.5 million, and the total interest paid across all the remaining COB accounts, the SAS Crop Insurance COB is the largest component, is another $5 million. Average rate was about 0.19%, and again, that's because rates are so extremely low right now in terms of interest paid on savings.
I would just like to add, like, the consolidated offset balance concentration arrangement has always, it's been in place since the 1990s. This is not new. And it's been a widely used practice throughout the decades.
It's, that's correct, and I think some refer to as cobbing, I believe. But I guess the feeling is that these dollars, this has become so sizable, these dollars, that the borrowing certainly isn't long term for the province. So I think the question is, is this program and ultimately producers being shorted when they're getting the shortest interest rate, the shortest term interest rate possible, even as opposed to a one-year rate, because it certainly isn't short-term lending for the province. And then I guess that begs another question around, at what point do you do a proper actuarial assessment of the dollars that should be held here by this program, what's required, and if we're well beyond the dollars required, which I believe in my conversations with agriculture and others that have weighed in on this, it seems that we're well beyond the dollars that are required from a reserve perspective on this. Then are producers being shorted in some way on this front, and could those dollars be deployed in a way that benefits producers in this province in a better way?
I won't speak for the Minister of Agriculture and Crop Insurance and producers. I think I'm quite plugged in with producers, and they recognize that we have increased coverage and increased commodities and changed crop insurance to the better for producers enormously over the last decade. And producers know that if there is a claim, if they have a claim, that this government will be paying that claim through crop insurance. And there's never been an issue there, so that would be their concern. But I don't think you will find too many producers that will say the program hasn't been enhanced considerably over the last number of years.
It's an interesting, it's an important area because we're talking about such sizable dollars. These are producers' dollars as well, and to short them the appropriate interest is something that certainly has an impact on them with those dollars. It's an area that I'd urge further focus. I know the Minister of Agriculture expressed some interest and concern over the matter, directed me back as well to this table. So I will, I'll leave it here. I think that it doesn't seem right that that as a government you're paying the lowest interest rate to producers on this front for these dollars that are important. Even if you just compare it, as I say, to providing a one-year, cost of a one-year rate, may be more fair. And then there's the question of how many dollars in fact need to be held in reserve. But I'll maybe move along just a little bit to another program, the auto fund, that has another sizable balance to it, almost $1 billion. I'm interested to make sure that we hear a commitment from the minister to ensure that those dollars will never be, that there'll never be legislation or actions of government to utilize those funds, enable them to the GRF, to make sure that they're there for their purpose through the auto fund, and if anything, as we've seen with the rebate, making sure they go back to whom they belong to when that's appropriate.
I want to go back to your statements that you made on the crop insurance, and correct me with what I'm missing, but when you buy an insurance policy and you pay a premium, that money is not yours. What you buy is assurance that you will get coverage should there be any event under the policy that you then are in the position to have a claim. And the insurance company is then obligated to pay out your claim and to keep money in reserve enough to be able to manage a large number of claims. There is no question the government of Saskatchewan will be there for whatever our agriculture claims are. So I know that in your comments, you're kind of alluding that these are the producers' money that needs to go back to the producers. They're buying an insurance policy, and we do also buy reassurance. Should there be a catastrophic event, we buy insurance on the insurance to basically take some risk out of a high claim year. For SGI Auto Fund or SGI Canada funds, you need to take those questions to the Crown and Central Agencies Committee when the minister is before that committee.
Just to be clear on the questions around the crop insurance, so the question gets to rates and premiums and dollars that producers are contributing, and if the reserve that's accumulating is well beyond what's actuarially required, and then those dollars are being held, but being provided the shortest term interest rate around, the producers are being shorted with that pool of dollars, and that has an impact on producers by way of the premiums that they pay, the rates, and ultimately they are their dollars. And the whole purpose of the Crop Insurance Corporation, very important to this province, is to not to make big profits, but to ensure that protection to producers and the best value. So just if you look at the numbers over the last number of years, the growth in those reserves are significant, and I think that there's fair and important questions to be asked around an important work of government to look at what's the best way to treat those dollars. I know it also relates to federal agreements as far as how those dollars could be utilized or how they need to be managed. But I do think that this is an area that needs to be addressed, and certainly right now, by paying the shortest term interest rate for these dollars that are in significant surplus for producers shorts them of their benefit. I guess the question around the auto fund, the question was that we have this sizable fund. Can the Minister of Finance assure us that there wouldn't be actions of her government or legislation that would deploy those dollars or grab those dollars or utilize those dollars outside of the express purpose of why they're there?
You're asking a very hypothetical question, and I'm not sure what express purpose. Again, there's premiums, I know from past Minister of SGI, some of the premium dollars that SGI collects is directed towards traffic safety issues or initiatives. It's a hypothetical question, and it's best served asked in Crown and Central Agencies, and that Minister can dig into exactly where you're going with this.
This minister rules out, though, changing legislation in a way that allows access to those dollars by the GRF?
I don't know how the legislation's worded right now, so I'm not sure what change you're alluding to.
Just with respect to that fund, certainly, of course, we had advocated and pushed for a combination of a rebate on this front, and also a rate reduction because the fund was well in excess of the reserves that were required. We'd pushed that for some time. We went through an election pushing some of those components. We do appreciate seeing the government utilizing this incredible and strong crown in Saskatchewan to allow ratepayers to access some of the excess dollars, and it's their dollars ultimately. So we are supportive of that rebate. Now the question is, if you look at the actual earnings of the auto fund, you're talking about $192 million this year. So my question would be $192 million this year. Would have those earnings been $500 million this year without the rebate, or how has that rebate been profiled within the budget?
We'll find a line in the estimates document for you, but you're outside of the finance budget right now.
Member, maybe I'll try to answer your question generally, and I'll see if my officials can find a more specific answer in terms of the actual number you're looking for. But in general, you know, the auto fund has a rate stabilization reserve, and that's the fund.
No, that's for SGI.
Oh, sorry, SGI.
Those are
okay.
for SGI.
Great.
And if you start, you have to continue.
Okay, great.
One of the problems is we don't have, through this estimates process, we don't have the Minister of the Crowns or the Minister of SGI before us. So I was trying to get this is sort of our window to having an understanding of how these dollars, how this rebate is profiled within the budget.
We'll report.
So, but that's, you know, we don't have that. We don't have committees on it. So I'm just asking the minister. I know this year the net income is suggested that it's going to be $192 million. And then I'm wondering, because of course you have the rebate of about $350 million, would have the net income been about $500 million, factoring in those, or where, if that rebate hadn't occurred, or where is that rebate profiled within the budget?
Mr. Witherspoon, I would ask that you stay on track to the finance estimates, please.
It's my intent to stay on track. The windows to ask about these programs, you know, all roads lead through the finance minister on these fronts as far as how a budget is presented and organized. And so I guess I'll shift from that question, and I'll look for clarity in the coming days from government on that front. But if you look at the actual net income of the auto fund in the next 2 years, this year and next year, it's over $400 million in just those 2 years. The reserve, the auto fund itself is near $1 billion. So I think the question remains that ultimately, you know, we have an exceptional Crown Corporation here and delivering incredible value to Saskatchewan people, but ultimately the government is holding more dollars there than required. I guess to the finance minister, does she support the proper assessment of a further rebate and rate reduction to ensure, of course, that the auto fund has the dollars that it requires to meet obligations, but to make sure that the rightful owners of those dollars, the ratepayers, receive the benefits that they deserve?
Mr. Chair, I'm not obligated to answer questions on SGI. They have a board, they have a minister, they go through as well the Crown Investments Corporation board. So decisions are made on a number of levels, and the health or the auto fund, investment fund, is discussed at all of those tables, and there is a report. Crown and Central Agencies is the committee that reviews those reports, and the member will have every opportunity to ask questions on SGI when that committee meets.
Thank you, Minister. And again, I will caution Mr. Witherspoon, stay to the estimates on finance. Those questions that you have previously asked pertain to other committees, so please stay on track.
Not my intent to deviate at all, and I'll move along to another line of questioning. Certainly it all impacts the broader financial position of the province. One of the other challenges is we had scheduled the annual reports to be considered by the CCA committee. COVID intervened, so we do look forward to those opportunities with the respective Minister of SGI and the Minister of the Crown Investments Corporation. I guess in that case they're the same person, but it's clear that there's excess dollars there that should benefit the ratepayers. I'll move along a little bit to the PST, and I just, how much does 1% of the PST create in terms of revenue for the government in this 2021 budget?
So the answer to your question is $380.7 million.
Thank you for that. Now, when government made the changes in 2017 that we opposed strongly at that point around the PST, a 1% increase was worth about $242 million, I believe, and the broadening of the tax base was valued around $655 million, if I'm tracking that conversation properly. So can you advise me what the tax increases now cost the taxpayers of Saskatchewan? That would be the increase to the PST, but also the broadening that occurred in 2017.
So while the Deputy Minister is looking up specific number for this particular budget, I can say this, that the combined income tax and PST on Saskatchewan residents with the higher and broadened PST for a single person earning $40,000 of total income are paying $744 less than they were in 2007 when the previous government, I believe it was NDP, were in power. And for a combined income tax and PST in Saskatchewan, for a family of 4 that were earning $50,000 total income, are paying $2,404 less per year than they were in 2007 under this government today. If we have the combined income tax and PST for a family of 4 that earns $75,000, are making $1,844 more today than they were under the NDP with their tax regime. I could keep going down a number of scenarios if the member would like.
The answer, just the answer as far as the what the cost of the tax increase and the broadening, what that is in this fiscal year.
Not continued to track the base expansion. So at the time that the rate increase was, it was estimated to be worth $260 million, and the base expansion was $850 million.
So we're well over $1 billion, though, then into this fiscal when you look at the value per point plus the base expansion, and it's over a in a very short period of time. That's $1,000 over $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in Saskatchewan, which is money directly out of certainly their households, but it's money directly out of our economy. And I think we see the consequences of that. I know certainly Saskatchewan households know the consequences of that. Just to profile a couple numbers here, when I go back and look at the intercity comparison that the government publishes in the 2016 budget, just prior to those increases, and then I compare how much of an increase the average family is paying on PST, the amounts are significant. And as I say, if you're talking about over $1 billion tax hike, you're talking about $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in Saskatchewan. And it bears out if you look directly at the budget document published that your average household has really taken a serious hit on this front. But it hasn't just been households that have taken a hit on this front. Certainly, our economy has as well. And there's a few sectors of our economy that have really been hurt by the imposition of the PST, and specifically the restaurant industry. Really never, it was hit hard by the imposition of that PST. You see it play out. It was in decline. It was contracting ever since that period of time. And then, of course, the restaurant industry is facing such serious hardship right now through COVID. It would seem that now more than ever, it would be a good time to revisit that decision and an important time to remove the PST from restaurant meals. I guess, is the minister open to doing so, and why didn't this budget provide that commitment at a time of such hardship for our restaurants?
I just want to highlight for the member that the Saskatchewan PST rate continues to be the lowest in Canada, with, of course, the noted exception of Alberta that does not have a provincial sales tax. But for all other provinces, we have the lowest PST rate in the country. Also, the exemptions that we have from PST is basic groceries, prescription drugs, reading materials, personal services, feminine hygiene products, used goods and vehicles have exempt amounts, electricity, natural gas, farm machinery and repair parts, fertilizer, pesticides and seeds, agriculture, life and health insurance are all tax exempt as well. We have a low-income tax credit, and we have increased that in previous years. Not all provinces have that tax credit, and it's a redeemable tax credit, so you don't have to pay taxes to get it. It is cash, and then we have a rebate for new home construction, and there was other affordability initiatives that were specific to this budget, and I would love to highlight those affordability initiatives for the committee. One is a 10% rebate on power bills, and that helps both individuals, families, and businesses. There's the SGI Auto Fund rebate that the member highlighted earlier. We have reinstated the indexation of the personal tax exemption, and we have one of the highest tax exemption, which then equates to the lowest income tax paid in the country. I believe we're second. Specific to seniors, we reduced the ambulance fees and we increased the seniors income plan. For families in this budget, we increased support for diabetic supplies, we increased support for families with children with autism, and we're reinstating the active families benefit. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the home renovation tax credit. Now, I know that the member opposite likes to see the intercity comparison of taxes and utilities, and they are on pages 72 and 73 of the budget. And he must note that when you have a single person at $40,000 total income, we are the lowest cost. When you look at the intercity comparison, for a family I'm assuming it's a family of 4 at $75,000 total income. We're the second lowest. And for a family owning or making $100,000, it is the second lowest for that as well. So I think there is a number of measurements that our government's put in place to make life more affordable. Is there always work that needs to be done? For sure, we review that with each and every budget. But it is very easy for him to say, okay, this is $1 billion that is additional taxation. But then we have a number of public employees. I think they're very important. They deliver services for the betterment and the health and welfare of our citizens. And we don't appreciate that more than we have now over this past year, in particular in healthcare, but also in education, in social services that are working with those most vulnerable. I think we have an appreciation like never before for the individuals that work in those services for the benefit, the health, the well-being, and better lifestyle for our citizens. Every year, we have completed a complete round of collective bargaining. Most of the tables are going to see a few years of 2% increases. And that is cumulative over time. And there then needs to be a revenue source that helps to pay those well-earned wages. And I suggest to the member opposite that, yes, the tax amount does go up over time, but so does what we pay our public service. And I don't think he would ever once, unless he wants to tonight, want to say that we should then have permanent zeros because we don't have the revenues. I think he would like to see those revenues increase over time that would cover the cost of those services that the people of our province expect.
The minister presents a false choice here, though, and really covers over the mismanagement of her government, which comes home to roost. And this is the cost of it. And when you have things like that bypass that just went off the rails by way of cost, biggest overrun in Saskatchewan's history, a project that ballooned in a massive way, or the GTH and the deals that were associated there, the millions lost, or the carbon capture that was mismanaged and resulted in some of the highest cost power you could possibly put in the grid. This stuff, it's the decisions of her government that caused the pain that Saskatchewan people are now feeling, and it's hurting our economy when you've had such heavy imposition of new taxes, the biggest tax hike, of course, in Saskatchewan's history. Now, I guess my question is, has there been any accounting around this tax hike, over $1 billion annually now, imposed onto everything from construction to restaurants to used cars, certainly aptly described as a job killer? Has there been an assessment of how many jobs have been lost as a result of this massive tax hike in Saskatchewan that was imposed in the 2017 budget?
No.
Question about the restaurants. Could restaurants see some relief here? I know it's not in the budget, but this is a time where they're really hurting right now. Is the minister open to reconsidering the taxation on restaurants that was imposed, and would she consider scrapping the PST on restaurant meals at restaurants at this time? And if not, why not?
I think the member opposite has read the budget. He knows that it wasn't considered and it wasn't included in this budget. I believe, again, with the exception of Alberta, it is, I believe every other province does tax, maybe, I'm not sure about BC, tax restaurant meals. And in fact, pre-COVID, the restaurant revenues had returned to a fairly healthy level. Now, what they need is the small business support that we're giving them. I think many of them qualify for a number of the federal programs. They probably appreciate the fact that we have taken the small business tax to zero for this year to help them through this very, very difficult time. And the one thing that I agree with the member wholeheartedly is this is extremely difficult for our hospitality sector as a whole, restaurants, bars, hotels, all. I think that they appreciate the 10% reduction on their power bills, the zero small business tax, the small business grant program, and we are hoping that they will be reopened through the reopening plan. We need people to get vaccinated. We need to get them back full capacity as soon as possible. And that's what they need more than anything, is to go back to doing what they do extremely well, which is providing a service to the people of Saskatchewan. That's what they want to see. They want to see a plan of how they can go back to their business. They all have been impacted by COVID, as has many other businesses. And that's why we were so quick to have a standalone provincial program. I believe it was Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia were the first two provinces that designed a program and had it available for our producers or for our small business owners, and we've had it now for a number of months. That is why in this budget that we have zero small business tax for this year. That is why we have a 10% reduction to their power, and we've tried to help them where we can. Can we backfill all business income that's been lost? Unfortunately, we can't. As the member mentioned earlier, provincially, we're borrowing a great deal of money. We are borrowing. The positive thing is the number of investment announcements that we've had over the last couple of weeks, but definitely over the last year, has been truly exciting. It will create jobs, and with those jobs will come people coming in for the construction, for the operations, and they'll be eating in restaurants, and they'll be utilizing some of those hotels. So do they want to see us attract that investment and have massive projects that are underway and soon to be operational? I believe they do, and we're going to work very hard to attract those investments.
I would just leave it stand that this is a time for a really meaningful measure. The addition of the PST really devastated that sector. The highest, in fact, we've never returned to the numbers that existed pre the imposition of that tax. So we've seen decline and we've seen a stagnation on that front. We've seen job loss. This is an important time to fix that mistake and remove the PST. And just, I guess, a reminder on the small business tax rate to zero, and I support that. We support that. But right now, when you're chatting with a lot of local restaurants, they're not going to have earnings this year. They're in the red. They're scraping by. That's the stress as I'm sitting with local business owners across Saskatchewan, restaurant owners across Saskatchewan, is the fact that they're not making a profit this year in many cases, or it's incredibly slim margins. So 0% of nothing is nothing. I support the 0%, but I would urge that it would be foolhardy to suggest to businesses that are on a razor's edge right now across Saskatchewan that that's much of a benefit to them, because it isn't right now. It's measures like the PST that will have real impact in filling those restaurants back up as it's safe to do so and getting people back to work. Which takes me to the imposition of the PST onto construction labor. This was another choice that was made that took a slowing economy and really slammed on the brakes, stuck us in recession. And in the case of construction, it was in a very challenging situation long before going into COVID. We have had, of course, shed thousands of jobs in that sector at that point. Permits had plummeted. And now we come through this year of COVID, and I guess if we look at the Stats Canada results that were published just this week, we are the only province in all of Canada that actually have a decline in the value of construction permits, and in a significant way. We have a 12% reduction in Saskatchewan during this past year. Meanwhile, other provinces have, Manitoba had an increase, Alberta had a 27% increase, British Columbia had a 58% increase, Quebec had a 92% increase, New Brunswick had an 82% increase. I guess my point to the minister is that it was a mistake to add the PST to construction labor when it happened. It hurt that industry, and in many ways it weakened our economy and hurt the finances into the long term of Saskatchewan when folks are put out of work and when investment plummets and people move from Saskatchewan. My urging to the minister, of course, it stands on restaurants, that restaurants should be, the PST should be scrapped right now, but isn't this the exact time that we should be sending the signal and making the decision to scrap the PST once again on construction labor?
I think the member must be quite excited that there will be a number of building permits that will change that number substantively. I've read it into the record before, but I would love to do it again, and that is announcements that have been made over the past year of investment in our province, and much of that will create a lot of construction. But we'll go to the Prairie Lithium Corporation, which is 2 stages, producing lithium hydrogen from Saskatchewan oil field brines. There's Proton Technologies, which is first of its kind hydrogen production project in the Crobbit area. There's Benchmark PPE, which is open to personal protective equipment manufacturing facilities. So there was construction, Bridgeback Resources, Steel Reef. I go to High Rock Resources Limited. Then we have the Richardson's International an announcement of the canola crush plant in Yorkton. The Seed Cleaning Capital Group Limited has announced a new facility in Saskatoon. Cargill has announced a new crush plant just outside of Regina. Viterra announced a crush plant as well, just outside of Regina, as well as a state-of-the-art grain elevator at Bigger. We've got North American Helium Incorporated, which is the largest helium purification facility at Battle Creek. We've got Genesis Fertilizer Facility that will begin construction near Belle Plaine. Saskatchewan Food Industry Development Centre, which is going to invest $2.3 million to expand the Agri-Food Innovation Centre. And then the most recently is the Saskatchewan Mining and Minerals expansion to upgrade its sodium sulfate plant in Chaplin. All of that, I'm sure, is going to require building permits. So we're going to see that number improve, as well as our own budget, where we're investing $3.1 billion in infrastructure as a stimulus for recovery and growth going forward. So I'm sure the member opposite is probably quite pleased to hear about that investment, and obviously the confidence in a number of industries in our province.
Well, I'm certainly I'm thrilled with any company making commitments and investing in Saskatchewan. Work with many of those companies that have been identified. I have regular conversations with them. I thank them for the investments that are that are placed. I share those publicly as well. And certainly we need to have an investment climate that has the conditions that allow investment to happen. And it could be so much more. This PST that's been brought forward has been a real drag on the economy. And with respect to construction and getting people back to work, we really need to allow investment to step up right now. The fact that our GDP's been, basically, even if you look at the forecasts of this government, it's going to be stagnant over such a long period of time. That has real consequences for workers in this province and for businesses in this province. So we'll continue to push to scrap the PST on construction labor. It's an incredibly important economic measure right now to energize this economy. It's important as well to get that economy back on its feet to ensure sustainable finances into the future. We're not going to get our finances back on track by having people out of work. We're not going to have our finances back on track by having people leaving the province. We're going to get our finances back on track by getting our economy back on track. The minister identified in her comments, maybe to the previous question, a question that I had. She spoke about the SAS Power rebate, and I just wanted to get a little bit more information on the rebate and the distribution of those dollars. So I'm just looking for the total sum of that rebate this year, and then a bit of just the breakdown of, from that total sum, what dollar value goes to the different classes of ratepayers: residential, farm, commercial, industrial, and so on.
Just to follow up in something that you commented, and PST in construction is not unusual. Again, there is no PST in Alberta, but most provinces have PST on all of construction. If his theory was indeed fact, which it is not, Alberta should be just booming. Honestly, it should be absolutely booming, because not only do they not have PST on labor construction, they don't have PST at all. So there's a whole lot of factors that he's choosing to ignore. He may say that he understands the economy, but obviously some of his statements flies in the face of that, because there's so much more to what attracts investment than one small item. As for his specific question, those details would be with SAS Power. He has every opportunity in the Crown and Central agencies to ask those questions of SAS Power and the appropriate minister.
So I want to stay obviously within the parameters of the committee, and the intention wasn't to be outside of that. We haven't had every opportunity. We've had actually no opportunity to have the SAS Power minister or the Crown's minister. But the money actually comes from the GRF in this case, right? Because this is this rebate. So my question is, how much money is flowing from the GRF to, what's the cost of the rebate on this front?
The money flows through trade and export, not finance. And the distribution breakdown, I could be wrong, and that minister could correct this, but I believe would be known by SAS Power. I don't know whether Ted would know that.
Minister Harrison answered the question in committee. The
Oh.
amount is $174.9 million, by the way.
I was told that Minister Harrison did answer those questions.
Okay.
Again, I would tell Mr. Witherspoon that we, due to COVID, we did cancel the CCA meeting with the Crowns. Those are questions that you could keep for a later date, and they'll get answered by the Crowns. Stay on track, please.
Well, we're trying to all do our part here and have limited windows to ask some of the questions. I may be, and indulge me, or on the other piece here, I will certainly follow up on the SAS Power piece appropriately, as far as that breakdown as well. Around the piece around connectivity in Saskatchewan, obviously this is something that relates to one of our Crown corporations, SaskTel, which is in an incredible position to act on this front. But something that connects more directly to our finances, actually very directly to our finances, is the dividend of that Crown. And I know groups like APAS, and certainly we've advocated that now is a time that we really need to make connectivity a priority, that we need to put our money where our mouth is, that we need to really connect rural Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan, including our towns and farms and villages and First Nations. It's incredibly important for security and quality of life and presents a tremendous economic opportunity, which also then connects directly back to the finances of the province when you're driving investment, getting people to work. I guess I would urge this minister to advocate for a reduction in the dividend from SaskTel so that they have the capital required in a very focused way to connect Saskatchewan. We didn't see that in this budget. I guess I'd maybe just look to the minister if she has, any comments or commitments on that front moving forward.
So for the sake of the members of the committee and the listening audience, I can't say watching audience, I can say listening audience. Prior to going to summary financial statements, there was what people deemed, although it's not entirely what explains it, but there was 2 sets of books. So the province used to do accounting called GRF counting, so the General Revenue Fund accounting. And then once a year through public accounts, you would see the actual roll-up or the summary financial statements. There was a time under the previous government where a dividend actually did take place, where money would go from the Crown corporations to the GRF, and then it would strengthen the bottom line of the GRF. And it was used, perhaps I'm a little prejudiced, sometimes it was used very wisely, sometimes it was used for a political reason, just to shore up the GRF so it looked better than it should, or for various other reasons, or it was directed to some specialized program. When we went to summary financial statements and the Crown corporations then is entirely in our books, a dividend becomes redundant because we record the bottom line, be it a profit or a loss, and in the Crown corporations it's a profit is recorded in the books in totality. So a dividend is not a line item that can be manipulated in the same manner that it was in the past. So the Crown corporations come forward with their plan to the Crown Investments Corporation. They have a business plan for the year. They have a capital plan for the year. Executive government does do the borrowing for the Crown corporations for their capital plan. But yes, if they have a connectivity initiative, then they have it in their business plan. That's viewed by their board. And then it will also be reviewed by the Crown Investments Corporation minister and board. And those decisions are made at that level. The roll-up of what they believe or project would be their profits or expenses comes then to executive government and is incorporated in its entirety into our budget that you all see.
The point being, so I understand summary finances, as the minister knows very well. I've pushed hard on this government when they were non-compliant with public sector accounting standards on this front, and in fact failed an audit. Only province in Canada to do so. So summary accounting is important. The point is where the borrowing's at, and right now we have an initiative that's so important to all of Saskatchewan that I believe, and other folks like APAS and others believe, that it shouldn't just be borne through SaskTel itself, but that the borrowing, that the cost should be something that's across government. And so to ensure that SaskTel has additional capital that they can direct and focus and prioritize on this front, and that they're not just having to borrow those dollars themselves. As a Crown corporation, they're dealing with capital to equity ratios that are challenging here, and if you borrow a bunch of money in SaskTel on this front, ultimately ratepayers have to cover that. What we would see here is something transformational, not unlike something of other generations, like connecting Saskatchewan through, power or gasification. It's a really important initiative, though important economically, one with return. So I would urge the minister to be involved in those conversations. Certainly, I will be following up with the Crown's minister in the appropriate venue when a committee is booked, as well as with SaskTel. I'd be interested in moving along to an understanding of where the fiscal stabilization, federal fiscal stabilization program's at right now, and how it connects to our budget this year. I know this was a program that the province will have been active in discussions around some reform, and I'm wondering, how does the fiscal stabilization program, the federal program, relate to this budget by way of dollars and impact?
The federal government didn't, even though it was unanimously asked by all of the provinces, and we spent a lot of time with the various finance ministers across the country. It was, I think, precedent setting that provinces that would not benefit from it supported the 3 provinces that would, which was Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Newfoundland, Labrador. And we took that forward, and again, it was Minister Morneau at the time. They made some minor changes, but did not make the changes that was unanimously asked for. So there is no dollars in this budget anticipated from that program.
So to clarify, now last year, what did we receive, or did we receive anything in the previous fiscal? And then to just clarify again that there's no anticipation of dollars from the federal fiscal stabilization program in this budget.
I think I know what last year was, but I'm just getting it confirmed before I say it. Last budget, we received 18.6 million.
Information, certainly not significant dollars, and there's no anticipation of dollars this year.
So it's a 2-year lag, but I still, because of the way the calculations are done, which is what we had asked, but yeah.
What about where's equalization and the conversation at right now? I mean, obviously, this is something that that we feel that we're treated unfairly on, and something that as Saskatchewan New Democrats and when in government and as the official opposition, we've been very consistent in stating that unfair treatment and to fight for change. I'm interested in where, if the minister can give us a report of her actions and her government's actions in the previous year, as far as representing Saskatchewan's interests and pushing and pursuing change on this front, and what that's going to look like in the year ahead.
So supposedly, equalization, I think it's reviewed every 5 years. And that would have been prior to the previous federal budget, except they haven't had one for 2 years. So we're going back 2.5 years. And we had put forward, again, changes of what we would like to see that would benefit Saskatchewan, in particular, the unfair way that non-renewable resources are calculated in the in the equalization, and how in the case of hydro, which is also a great resource, is not included in those calculations, which then translates in the province of Manitoba getting over $2 billion in equalization. And so all of that was put forward. We were told as provinces that there would be a consultation process. However, that never happened. And we basically found out on their budget day with a omnibus budget that there it is. And thanks for coming out, folks. And there was no consultation. Since that time, as you well know, they don't even entertain the conversation on equalization right now. They are, the federal government, and in fairness, when, you know, a year from now, or a year past, for every reason, was totally preoccupied with their different programs to help Canadians and Canadian businesses with the COVID and what was happening with the pandemic. They still are not receptive to having a conversation about equalization. Through the pandemic, the finance ministers every week or every second week have a conference call, all of the finance ministers across the country, along with the federal minister, and that was started with Minister Renault and has been continued with Minister Freeland. However, that is not something they want to discuss. And it's a difficult it's difficult to get the support because you get the provinces that are benefiting quite largely from equalization, of course, don't want to have the conversation either. Will we continue to pursue changes? Yes, absolutely, because the bottom line is it's a very distorted calculation. It's a very complicated calculation. But if you study the history of it, it has been changed. It isn't impossible, and we'll continue to pursue to get changes. There's been times where resource revenues were accounted for more heavily than other times, and I think in light of what is happening and how we're moving forward, we need that to be looked at and changed. But have I revisited it since COVID was started? I have not, to be honest with you, other than verbally, to maybe mention it, but it's just not well received on those calls right now.
Appreciate the information, and without a doubt, the resources and focus of all levels of government have really been rightly focused, prioritized around COVID. As we come through COVID, and when we are safe, and as we've got our economy reopening, I think it's important to get back into important files like equalization, and I would urge the minister to take up that advocacy at the appropriate time in the coming year, as well as around the fiscal stabilization fund, or the fiscal stabilization program federally, but certainly around equalization. No, just a question on equalization. Certainly, we haven't had the resource revenues that we had for a period of time. These last few years have been challenging on this front. Are we in a position to be entitled to any equalization in this fiscal or in the coming years?
I'm going to try this, and then I might have Rupin correct me because I may totally get it wrong. It's not the revenues bring in, it's the potential of the asset to bring in revenues, which is the problem, because you are being credited for revenues that you cannot generate in the market as it is. That's to the equalization. To the stabilization, the reduced revenues that we need to have in order to qualify is so dramatic that it's very, very difficult for us to ever reach it then to qualify for an equalization payment. So basically, both programs work against us, even though the revenues from the resources has been down. Do I have to be corrected?
No, you don't.
Oh,
Do you want
cool.
me to add anything to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so member, you'll know that we last qualified for equalization in 2007, and since 7-8, and since that time, essentially the strength in the economy, and the minister's quite right. It's called the fiscal capacity cap that essentially reduces our equalization payment. So it's a multi-step process that's used in calculating equalization. On the first step, although we may qualify because of fiscal capacity, the 100% inclusion of resources, our ability to extract resources, essentially we're removed from the equalization rule. There's also kind of other factors with respect to the time lag that's built into the equalization formula. So there's a 5-year time lag that's built in. So for 21-22, they're using 17-18 fiscal capacity. So even though you might have had a significant reduction, you're using fiscal capacity from 17-18 as opposed to in the middle of the pandemic. So 21-22 will register in 6 years out, so 26-27, I guess. So it's unlikely for the foreseeable future, based on the current program, that Saskatchewan will receive any equalization payments.
Thanks for the information, and all the more reason to, when the time is right, to pursue with consistency the changes on these fronts. I know last year I asked the minister if she regretted dropping the lawsuit back in the day, and I know she didn't answer that directly. I won't ask her to answer that question again, but I do think that if we're going to find improvements on this front, consistency and just being regularly focused on that file is the only way we're going to find progress. I'd like to shift just a little bit to property taxes in the province. There's been some changes made this year. There's an increase in property taxes in this budget, and there's also changes to the mill rates that have been made by government, as well as, I guess, the change around the commercial assessment, the shift from the 100% to 85% for commercial properties. I guess I'd look to the minister to describe the changes to mill rates and then the impacts for each of those property classes, agricultural, residential, commercial, industrial, and resource, and as well then characterize or profile the impacts of the reduction of the assessment from 100% to 85 for commercial.
Those are all GR for the property tax.
That's the minister's directing us to government relations, and that's appropriate. I mean, ultimately, there's the increase shows up in the finance estimates. The increase to property taxes. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. Yes, it does show up because we collect it, but I can just on a broad, because I don't have those details. Just on broad, usually. Any given year, we have a little bit of an increase because obviously there's more houses being built or more, so every year there's always growth increases. Last year was a revaluation year, so that's when there's the readjustment of the mill rates, and so those calculations would have been done in GR and who it impacts on the different classes. So I'd have to redirect it to GR.
Fair enough. We can follow up there. I mean, our concern is that the sizable impact has occurred on the residential side, but we'll pursue that. We've had some conversation on this over the floor, I guess, in this assembly, but we'll pursue it there. I'm interested around just the. Of course, the impact of our economy and our GDP on the revenues of our province, and I know this isn't as easy of a calculation as the impact on oil price or the Canadian dollar or potash price and shipments that we can calculate. How much an increase will impact the budget. But with respect to the GDP, if what's 1% of GDP growth estimate by way of revenues for the province of Saskatchewan? So I guess if we beat the budget, that the assumptions we have this year, if Saskatchewan is 1% higher than that, what's the fiscal impact for our province?
Done well, and he said it's going to be a couple minutes yet.
Sorry about that.
Casually, the pace of the back and forth has been awesome tonight, compared to
Take the record on being
No.
able to stay here and answer your
yeah.
questions.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You know, I guess, so I appreciate the, and I hope I hope that our economy rebounds in a way far beyond the assumptions that we see this year. And in fact, I think there's a chance that could happen. I look at some of the private sector forecasts. They exceed what government's forecasts are in this budget. And so that would be a really good thing. And so what I was trying to get around to is just, you know, what a 1% increase, if we beat those assumptions by 1%, what's the additional tax revenues, the fiscal impact that benefit. And of course, the converse of that is also the case. If, you know, what if we shed, we miss them by 1%. But I guess I would say, and we've talked about the economy tonight, I've profiled some of the concerning choices that have been made in the last few years on these fronts. But we also are seeing I guess the evidence or the impacts of those decisions. And you know, in Saskatchewan's GDP in 2018 was $87 billion. Now this past year it was $77 billion in 2020. But your projection for 2021 is that it will be approximately $80.6 billion with the projected rebound of 3.4% in 2021. And that by the end of the 2022, your forecast is that GDP will reach $83.2 billion. Now this is concerning because even considering the pandemic-induced recession last year, we'll have gone almost 5 years with not only no growth, but with a serious decline, a serious contraction. 87 billion in 2018 to 83 billion 5 years later. And I guess my question is this really what your government is projecting on this front?
Yeah. Yes, that's what the budget projects.
Appreciate the minister being direct. I mean, it is a concern. We see an economy that's declined seriously over those, you know, over that 5-year period, and that's factoring in the rebounds that are assumed here. I guess my biggest concern is that your government isn't meeting your economic targets or forecasts over the past several years, and it makes, you know, things like assumptions difficult. But if we look, your government had projected that our real GDP back in 2016-17, the projection was that it would be $95 billion in 2021, the current fiscal. Yet, right now it's projected it'll only be $80.6 billion by the end of 2021. Even considering the pandemic last year, your government will have missed targets from 2016-2017 by almost 17%, or $14 billion. So, of course, you know, we can set aside the impacts of the pandemic because this goes much beyond that. What do you factor in for this poor performance?
You know, the projections always are, and definitely data is not as certain as it is normally. But we've seen growth in revenues, growth in the province, and that did plateau for a year. And then, of course, we're in a pandemic. But I could read you, and I, read it in the record before, and I can read them all into the record again, of the confidence that all of the investment bankers have. when they reviewed our budget. There's also the credit rating agencies that have had confidence in our ability to grow, manage our debt. And I could probably talk the clock into reading those quotes into the record. There is confidence from those that are involved and watch this and study it and analyze it. And those are the expertise that I look to in their confidence in our projected revenue plan. In what you first started with in mentioning that you hope to see that we do even better than what we're projecting. And I agree. I think a very interesting time for both you and I will be the second quarter. That's when you get some pretty good data. And a good indicator will be the PST, because it's real, like it's in real time. The corporate income tax, of course, goes through the federal government. But I'm quite optimistic that we're going to see it better than what we've been projecting. But they are projections, and we made projections based on very soft data, because we're experiencing something that hasn't been experienced in literally decades and decades.
Thanks to the minister. We have a big issue in front of us right now for Western Canada, really big for Saskatchewan, and we're going to see how it plays out in the coming days. But right now there's a lot of concern, and that relates directly to Line 5 and the government of Michigan potentially acting or indicating. Every indication is that they're going to take this line offline to shut down the flow of that line. That has a significant impact to the Saskatchewan economy and to our producers. My understanding is that the majority of Saskatchewan's energy flows through that line. And so this is causing a lot of stress for our province as a whole, but for an industry that's already faced very serious headwinds and hardship in the last number of years. It's critical, of course, that we represent Saskatchewan's interests on this front, Canadian interests on this front, also describing the consequences, negative consequences around energy prices that will be also shared by Americans and by those in Michigan on this front. But it's critical from a Saskatchewan perspective, both fiscally and economically. So I hope that, that line keeps flowing, but we don't have that assurance and the deadline is looming. So I'm wondering, as a government right now, what have you estimated the cost on a daily, from a daily perspective? I suspect you're modeling it in that sort of a way. What's the fiscal cost to the province and the economic cost to the province for every day that line would be shut down?
That would be worked on right now from Energy and Resources Ministry, that watches the pulse of that and does those calculations, and then eventually we would get that data, but my shop wouldn't be doing that work. It's a huge concern. I share that with the member, and just would like to throw out a suggestion. It's something that is talked about at the COF table, the Confederation, or the Council of Confederations. So all of the premiers across the country are concerned. And I would say that he should talk to his leader and tell him to have a conversation with Jagmeet Singh, because quite frankly, we have to have a federal government that stands up and has some serious conversations with the President of the United States and the Governor of Michigan. And quite frankly, Jagmeet has tended to not be in favor of pipelines at all. And yet he has a lot of influence on the federal government because he could stand up and not vote for some of the things they want, which he's not willing to do. So maybe he could use some of the power that he has and get them motivated to stand up for not just Saskatchewan. Our product is important to all of Canada. So perhaps you could talk to your leader and suggest that he has that conversation with the national NDP leader.
Not to get into sort of the party pieces too much, but without a doubt, I can assure this minister and my constituents and the people of Saskatchewan will always stand up for Saskatchewan's interests and Canada's interests on this front. I've certainly been very clear and direct with the leader of the federal NDP, the previous leader of the federal NDP on these matters, as we will with whatever prime minister, or as we will with, in other areas, like when the Conservatives broke their promise around equalization. We'll always stand up for Saskatchewan's interests, regardless of what party or what leaders take various positions federally. Certainly for Saskatchewan, for Alberta, for Canada, this Line 5 is very important. Access to markets for our energy are very important. And I know, it's the kind of effort that really we should have an all-party sort of approach, a united approach, in this case, a Team Saskatchewan approach. And, certainly that's my urging. But the decision looms, and it's just a few days away. So I would urge, actions. I'll use my voice to whatever extent I can, but ultimately this needs to be resolved with the Governor of Michigan, with the United States, but the impacts are significant for our province. With respect, the minister identified the second quarter report, and I'm with her. I look forward to that as well, because it, especially in this year, it's going to really provide a lot of information as to what direction the economy is going and where the budget is at. The other report that's an important report, every one of those financial reports are important. The first quarter, the mid-year, the third quarter. They provide a level of transparency and accountability back to Saskatchewan people, an important window into the state of our finances and our economy. And now more than ever, when we're accumulating the kind of debt that we are, as we're coming through the kind of unprecedented challenges that we are, I would urge that governments should be as transparent and accountable as possible. The minister knows it's been a bone of contention over the past couple years that the third quarter report has not been made public until the budget's been presented. This really prevents an open, transparent conversation around the state of the finances in this province. So my request or urging or call to the minister is that the third quarter be released independent of the budget next year, and that the government commit to that in years moving forward as a simple measure of transparency and accountability to the people of the province.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Minister.
Member, just to return to your earlier question, so 1% increase in GDP would drive revenue by approximately 125 million. So that's based on just looking at the components of revenue that are own source versus federal transfers, obviously.
Thank you very much for getting that information as well. And the hope is that the projections hope we can beat the projections in a significant way. And there is some hope with private sector forecasts right now that may manifest. I'm interested in shifting back to a conversation that I know the minister knows I've been interested in over the years, and that's around leveling the playing field around commerce, and particularly those e-commerce platforms outside Saskatchewan that had this unfair advantage and put our Saskatchewan retailers at a disadvantage where they weren't subjected to taxation. Folks like, Amazon, the big e-commerce platforms who, shouldn't have an advantage over a local retailer that's got, working hard here in Saskatchewan, probably has a storefront, certainly has staff, are paying taxes here in a significant way. So I've applauded the effort over the last year by this government to act on this front, and I'm just looking for a bit of an update as to the impacts. How are we doing around collecting the revenues that Saskatchewan people are owed from these out-of-province e-commerce platforms?
Oh, and we're leaders in this space, too.
Okay. So just to maybe tie off the previous comments by the member, we were the only province who released public accounts in June of last year. Other provinces didn't, and we have been very responsive and transparent. Now, the other good news is that since we started to pursue collecting tax on electronic platforms in 2019-20, we collected 35 million, a little over 35 million. And in 2020-21, be a little over 49 million. So the officials are diligently reaching out and reminding them as they pop up and we know them, that they need to be paying this tax, and it's paying off, obviously, in a very big way, and other provinces are looking at how we're doing it.
Yeah, I would commend the officials that have been working on this and thank them. And I don't know exactly what we're collecting right now, how that relates to what we should be collecting. But I continue to extend my appreciation and urging to continue this focus, because it is a matter of equity and fairness for Saskatchewan retailers and their valued revenues, obviously, back into the budget. The chair told me I had one more question, unless it's about the crowns. Then he said not the crowns. So my question is, we've had debates over the years around the deployment of public dollars and how they connect to the Saskatchewan workforce and Saskatchewan companies. Now more than ever, where we're taking on debt in a very significant way to invest in things like capital that are needed, it's critical that we maximize the return for Saskatchewan people, the economic return, the value in that procurement. It's critical that we make sure that we've got Saskatchewan workers and Saskatchewan companies who are engaged in this work, and that we put Saskatchewan first on this front. Do we have the minister's commitment to make sure that as these dollars, significant dollars, get deployed, that we make sure that we're maximizing the return for Saskatchewan people and workers and the province and the budget as a whole by taking a Saskatchewan first approach?
He uses his last question to ask a Sask Builds question. I don't have the stats. They're very, very impressive. The Sask Builds minister does have those statistics on the stimulus dollars and how much was Saskatchewan awarded to Saskatchewan companies, and even those sometimes where they're not necessarily a Saskatchewan company, it was Saskatchewan workers. And, you know, we have to respect trade agreements, but we are always committed to finding those Saskatchewan companies and giving them every opportunity to bid without telling them they can't bid in other provinces.
Having reached the agreed upon time for considerations of the estimates for the Minister of Finance, we will now vote on the estimates for Ministry of Finance. Vote 18, Finance. Central Management and Services FI01, subvote, in the amount of $8,535,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Provincial Comptroller subvote FI03, the amount of $10,191,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Treasury Management subvote FI04 in the amount of $1,613,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Revenue subvote FI05 in the amount of $23,549,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Budget analysis subvote FI06 in the amount of $6,657,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Miscellaneous payments subvote FI08 in the amount of $5,022,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Pensions and benefits subvote FI09 in the amount of $180,642,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Personal Policy Secretariat subvote FI10 in the amount of $522,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Research and Development Tax subvote FI12 in the amount of $5 million. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriate expense adjustment in the amount of $2,626,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are not cash adjustments presented for informal purposes only. No amount to be voted. Finance, vote 18. $241,731 million. 731. Sorry. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to Her Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2022, the following sums for the financial amount of $241,731,000. Do I have a mover? Mr. Nerlin. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Supplementary estimate one for finance. You're going to do this one now.
Okay. Supplementary estimates number 2, vote 18, Finance. Miscellaneous payments on FI08 in the amount of $20 million. Is that agreed? Carried. Finance vote 18. Oh, sorry. Yep, Finance vote 18, 20 million. Okay, I got a sign.
Yeah, just a big one. Yep. Full one. Good work.
I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to Her Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2021, the following sums for finance to the amount of $20 million. Mr. Harrison, is that agreed? Carried. Okay, sign that. Okay, finance 12, debt financing statutory, debt servicing.
No. You're in this book.
Okay. Yeah, I can still read this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I thought you were going to sign
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one.
Debt servicing subvote FD01 in the amount of $500,700,000. There is no vote at the statutory, as this is statutory. Crown Corporation debt servicing subvote FD02 in the amount of $15 million. There's no vote on this, as it is statutory. Finance debt servicing vote 12, $515,700,000. There's no vote, as this is statutory.
Come back one page.
Oh,
Yep. There you go. Big one.
Vote 195, advances to resolving funds. Revolving, sorry, statutory. Advancing to revolving funds, vote 195 in the amount of $0. There is no vote, as this is statutory.
So initial there and then a big one.
Okay. Vote 151, Municipal Financing Corporation of Saskatchewan, statutory. Loan subvote MF01 in the amount of $10 million. There is no vote, as it is statutory.
And then a big one across.
Oh, I didn't know. God, just like. Vote 175, debt redemption statutory. Debt redemption vote 175 is in the amount of $289,450,000. There's no vote, as it is statutory. Is that where I was supposed to go?
We'll take that one for sinking fund payments. We'll get a big one right there.
Right here? Okay. Vote 176, sinking funds payment, government share statutory. Sinking funds payments, government share, vote 176 in the amount of $193,584,000. There's no vote, as this is statutory. I'm glad I did
A little one there.
sign there.
You can, sure. That is
In a rush. Okay.
right here.
170, vote 177, interest on growth debt. Crown Enterprise share, statutory. Interest on gross debt, Crown Enterprise share, vote 177 in the amount of $0. This is no vote, as it is statutory.
Good stuff.
Okay. Vote 175, debt redemption statutory. That's supplementary estimate number 2. Debt redemption on vote 175 in the amount of $379,308,000. There is no vote, as it is statutory. Okay. Just the name.
Yeah, we'll take a little initial there and you can, yeah, that's good. Okay, awesome.
Okay, that concludes our estimates with the Minister of Finance, Minister Harpar. The committee is going to continue to vote off other estimates. At this time, you could take a quick recess, and while we're finishing the estimates, before we consider bills, we'll have you back. If you and your officials would like to step out, you're welcome to. Thank you. We're still going, you guys. On. Sorry. Vote 33, Public Service Commission, Central Management and Services Subvote PS001 in the amount of $4,859,000. Is that agreed?
Carried.
Carried. Human Services Consulting Services Subvote PS03 in the amount of $9,128,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Employment Relations and Strategic Human Resources Services Subvote PS04 in the amount of $7,955,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Human Services Center Subvote PS06 in the amount of $11,778,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $305,000. Non-appropriated expenses adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informal purposes only. No amount to be voted on. Public Service Commission vote 33 for $33,720,000. I will now ask a member to move the resolution. Resolve that there be granted to Her Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2022, the following sum of Public Service Commission in the amount of $33,720,000. Do I have a mover? Mr. Scorpad. Is that agreed? Carried. Sign it.
Big one. Big signature.
Okay, vote 13, SAS Builds and Procurement, Central Management and Services Subvote SP01 in the amount of $51,000. There's no vote, it is statutory. Property Management Subvote SP02 in the amount of $5,606,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Project Management Subvote SP03 in the amount of $0. Is that agreed? Carried. Transportation and Other Services Subvote SP05 in the amount of $551,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Major Capital Asset Acquisitions Subvote SP07 in the amount of $46,113,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Information Technology Subvote SP11 in the amount of $23,220,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan Subvote SP13 in the amount of $4,363,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Infrastructure and Procurement Subvote SP14 in the amount of $20,058,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $790,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustment are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount to be voted on. SAS Builds Procurement vote 13 for $99,911,000. I will now ask. Sorry. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to Her Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2022, the following sums for SAS Builds and Procurement in the amount of $99,911,000. Mr. Jensen? All agreed? Carried. Vote 86, SAS Bills Corporation. SAS Bills Corporation subvote SB01 in the amount of $50 million. Is that agreed? Carried. SAS Bills Corporation, vote 86, 50 million, okay. Vote 86 for $50 million. Sign that. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to their majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2022, the following sum for SAS Bills Corporation of the amount of $50 million. Do I have a mover? Mr. Kiesek. All in favor? I agree. Is all agreed? Carried. Sorry. Vote 139, SAS Gaming Corporation, statutory, loan subvote GC01 in the amount of $0. There is no vote, as this is statutory. Vote 154, SAS Opportunities Corporation, statutory, loan subvote SO01 in the amount of $0. There is no vote, as this is statutory. Vote 152, Power Corporation, statutory, loan subvote PW01 in the amount of $443,900,000. There is no vote, as it is statutories. Vote 153, Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corp., statutory, loan subvote ST01 in the amount of $136,400,000. There is no vote, as it is statutory. Vote 140, Saskatchewan Water Corporation, statutory, loan subvote SW01 in the amount of $6,600,000. There is no vote, as it is statutory. Votes 197, SAS Bills Corporation, statutory, loan subvote BC01 in the amount of $0. There is no vote, as this is statutory. Vote 150, Sask Energy Corp., statutory, loan subvote SE01 in the amount of $160,100,000. There is no vote, as it is statutory.
Just give me a second here, Terry, to hand out these reports.
Committee members, you have before you a draft of the first report on the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. We require a member to move the following motion. The first report of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agency be adopted and presented to the Assembly. Do I have a mover? Mr. Jensen? Is that agreed? Carried. Once we sign it, once they sign it. Got him?
Yeah.
We recess for 10 minutes, and committee members, we will reconvene to finish the bills.
Okay, I just need you to sign this and write Carrie.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back, committee members. We will now be moving on to consideration of bills. The bills the committee are this evening are Bill 32, Vapor Products Tax Act, Bill number 33, Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2021, Bill 34, Fuel Tax Amendment Act 2021, Bill 35, Income Tax Amendment Act 2021, and Bill number 36, Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2021. We'll now be considering Bill number 32, the Vapor Products Tax Act. We will begin our considerations of Clause 1, short title. Minister Harper, please make your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have any additional comments to make that wasn't made in the legislature. I'll just open it up to questions.
Questions? Mr. Weatherspoon?
Thanks so much. As we've said on the record, we've called and support vaping being treated like smoking with uniform regulations and enforcement. Certainly, vaping rates are high in Saskatchewan, especially among youth. So it's important to factor that in. I understand this is a new tax of 20% on the retail price of vapor liquids, products and devices. And additional provisions, it also requires the license for a vendor. Now, I guess one question, does a vendor need a license for tobacco, to sell tobacco?
Yes.
Question here, how do these tax rates compare to other jurisdictions?
So for those that do tax vape products, it is the same. They're all 20%.
Earmarked for any sort of efforts around suppression or addressing overuse of vaping in the province?
We haven't dedicated it to something specific.
I don't have any further questions at this point.
Thank you. We'll enter in Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 2. I recognize Mr. Jensen.
No.
Clause 2 of the printed bill, amend subsection 1 of Clause 2 of the printed bill by striking out the definition of e-substance and substituting the following. E-substance means a solid, liquid, or gas that, on being heated, produces a vapor for use in an e-cigarette, regardless of whether the solid, liquid, or gas contains nicotine, but does not include A, cannabis as defined in the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Act, or B, a heated tobacco product as defined in the Tobacco Tax Act 1998.
Do committee members agree with the amendment as read?
Yeah, you can, he would like to ask a
Oh,
question.
sorry. Go ahead.
So just, the amendments, I appreciate that the minister identified to me a few days back that they were going to be coming here. I haven't had a chance to really look at them and understand so what are we excluding? It's cannabis juice or what's the?
So we had, of course, made our budget decision and had the legislation drafted prior to the federal government introducing their budget. In their budget, they are also going to tax vapor products, but they are excluding cannabis juice. And so for ease for our business owners, sort of having a number of different levels of taxation, we thought we would duplicate what the federal government is taxing, and will exclude the cannabis juice.
And how are other jurisdictions dealing with cannabis juice?
BC is the only jurisdiction that had a
So British Columbia was the only one who had a previous tax, and they do tax it? That's correct. They do tax it. The other provinces, I think there's 2 or 3 that are introducing this, probably will do the same as we are. We don't know yet.
Do you know what kind of revenues we'd be talking about off the juiced cannabis?
Yeah, just take it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult for us to be forecasting revenue on e-juice cartridges and devices. So we think the market's about 16 million annually, although the trade that occurs at a convenience stores and gas stations is a little bit difficult. It's kind of like the early days of cannabis. We didn't quite know. We had to wait till we got the data. So we're forecasting, prior to this amendment, we were forecasting 2.3 million in revenue from this measure. And now we've adjusted that to 2.2 million. We're accounting for about 100,000 of cannabis e-liquids that would drop out because of the alignment with the federal legislation.
So about $100,000 is what the juice, pulling the juice cannabis out. So I would assume that this doesn't prevent you from acting moving forward, so you can kind of observe the landscape and how this industry develops as well. And but the choice right now is a level, as you've described, is to have some consistency with how the federal government's going at this time.
That is correct.
Nothing would stop you if it was deemed felt that it was the responsible thing to do to act on this front and doing so independently at some point with legislation.
Right. We would have to come back, of course, for the legislative change. But if there is indication that this was not a wise decision, we can always come back.
And was there another in that amendment? Was there something else that was also?
Need to get to the clause. There is another amendment, and it's.
But in this amendment that was read, it was just the juiced cannabis that. Okay.
Okay. We have a proposed amendment, Clause 2, moved by Mr. Terry Jensen. Amendment subsection 1 of Clause 2 of the printed bill by striking out the definition e-substance and substituting it with the following. E-substance means a solid, liquid, or gas on being heated produces a vapor for the use of e-cigarette, regardless of whether it is solid, liquid, or gas. Contains no nicotine. Contains nicotine. Contains nicotine, but does not include cannabis. A, cannabis as defined in the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Act, or B, a heated tobacco product as defined in the Tobacco Act 1998. You're good? Is Clause 2 amended? Agreed? Carried.
So,
It's liquid. Clause 3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4. I recognize Mr. Jensen.
Clause 4 of the printed bill. Amend subsection 5 of Clause 4 of the printed bill by striking out or suspension.
just make sure Trent.
Trent, do you have any questions on the amendment?
Maybe just a question as to why, what this means.
I'm just turning, I know that it was when we asked for the original amendment, our legal advice was to change this one
I'm just trying to get the technical.
word by justice, but we'll get the technical explanation in one moment.
The question is that this clarifies that and avoids the automatic cancellation of other licenses if a vape license is suspended or canceled. So this suspension would involve all cannabis licenses and not just the Vapor Products Tax Act, or Vapor Products tax licenses. And it was asked for by SLGA. So it just clarifies that as you cancel it, the cannabis piece is separate still. Right.
Thank you very much for that. So you've been clear as to who's called for that change. Just as a quick follow-up, who advocated for the change on the other front with respect to the juiced cannabis?
The manufacturers of the juice notified myself. I'm not sure who notified the ministry. Cannabis people? So I know there was 2 companies, was it not? Cannabis Council.
Thanks for the information.
Okay, we have a proposed amendment in front of us, Clause 4 of the printed bill. Amend subsection 5 of Clause 4 of the printed bill by striking out "or suspension." It was moved by Terry Jensen. Do committee members agree to Clause 4 with the amendment? Agreed. Carried. Clause 5. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10, or 11, sorry. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 12, is that agreed? Clause 13, coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows: the Vapor Products Tax Act. I'd ask a member to move that we report Bill 32, the Vapor Products Tax Act, with amendment. Mr. Nerlin moves. Is that agreed? Carried. We'll now be considering Bill number 33, the Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2021. We will begin consideration of Clause 1, short title. Mr. Harpower, please make your opening comments.
So very, very briefly, a new heated tobacco products category is being introduced with the tax rate of 20.5 cents per unit. This category will provide Saskatchewan with the ability to tax heated tobacco products at a higher rate than the current 27 cents per gram, but at a lower rate than traditional cigarettes, to account for the slight health advantage to these products over traditional cigarettes.
Mr. Weatherspoon, any questions?
Thanks so much. Again, I think we're on the record here that we've been advocating for this sort of treatment of vaping from a health perspective. Just to get a sense of the consultation on this bill and who's been proponents or advocates for the changes that have been brought forward, if the minister can summarize some of that.
The Canadian Cancer Society would be who advocates. This isn't a juice or a vapor, it's that heat not burn. It's not a very widely used product in Saskatchewan.
Thanks for that information. I noticed. I know that our health critic has asked the question in sort of an open way while this legislation was open to say that, you know, that tobacco taxes haven't changed in the last 4 years. Meanwhile, the retail price has gone up significantly, and many other provinces have made some increases there from a health perspective. Is this a time, or is your government looking to act on this front from a health perspective?
We have fairly strongly in the past. We're one of the highest in the country. Sometimes the increases on the retail side is the federal government then increasing their tax, and it gets confused as to why they're making their increase. It wasn't considered at this time.
And has there been proper consultation to ensure that changes in this legislation don't infringe on treaty rights?
First Nations peoples are not subject to tobacco tax on reserve.
Right.
So.
And there's not change on that front. I don't have any other questions at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Move on to Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed? Clause 9, coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, acts as follows. The Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2021. I would now ask a member to move that we report Bill number 33, the Tobacco Tax Amendment Act without amendment, 2021 without amendment. Do I have a mover? Minister Harrison moves. Is that agreed? Carried. We will now be considering Bill number 34, the Fuel Tax Amendment Act 2021. We will begin our considerations of Clause 1, short title. Minister Harper.
So in this act, a new 150 annual fee is introduced at the time of registration of passenger electric vehicles registered in Saskatchewan, effective October 1st, 2021. The new fee will be administered by Saskatchewan Government Insurance and collected in full each year at the time of the vehicle's registration renewal date.
Questions, Mr. Weatherspoon?
Well, you know, I think we've been pretty clear where we stand on this this legislation, this change, this tax hike, Mr. Chair, and you know, I should make sure to place some of that onto the record here. I guess I would, you know, this is a regressive and foolish tax hike that just defies, you know, common sense. You know, and it's just, I think it's largely symbolic of this government's approach to climate change and their failure to act in practical, common sense ways that can secure good jobs, that can secure investment, that can reduce emissions in affordable ways. And the consequence of the approach of this government in a broader sense is that Saskatchewan people really are missing out on some important investments that could be made, that could be creating jobs today. We think of it, you know, we think of renewable energy and energy efficiency measures across the province. And so what we have is a province that are really being laggards on this front. And you know, this is a regressive gesture, I suspect politically motivated, but just, you know, reflective of the approach of this government on many fronts. My question maybe to the finance minister is, who did she consult or her government consult on this front?
We didn't consult on this front. What we looked at was the fact that there is significant revenue that is collected for road maintenance and renewal, $478 million, I believe, in this budget alone. And moving forward, that is going to be displaced more and more with the shift towards electric vehicles. The intent of the excise tax on fuel, of course, is to contribute to the wear and tear on our roadways, and there becomes a fairness issue on some vehicles creating that wear and tear on the roadways and others are not. So it was in that light that we decided to move forward and start the conversation of how we deal with that shortfall that's going to be increasing in nature. We did not view it as a deterrent for anyone to buying an electric vehicle. It is very insignificant when you look at the total cost of the vehicle itself. So we do not see it as a determining factor. I can't imagine anyone looking at buying one of these vehicles that $150 would make or break their decision. There is, you know, in doing a little bit of research on it, of course, there are 19 U.S. states that have moved in this direction with varying annual fees of some $50 up to $200, including the state of California, which, albeit I think everyone in this committee can acknowledge, is very environmental conscientious, but they also realize that the fuel or the road users all contribute to that maintenance and renewal of the roadway. It's a separate conversation, quite frankly, of this maintenance of roadways is helped or contributed to by roadway users to environmental initiatives. And we could probably be here for many hours if we wanted to have an environmental debate. But to me, they're two different conversations. This will not detour, it won't be a determining decision by an individual or a family to purchase one of these vehicles, and I do foresee that we're going to see more. What will help encourage them more, just for the member opposite, more purchases of electric vehicles, quite frankly, will be to have more charge stations. And I do fully acknowledge that we are, you know, we don't have a lot here in the province, and that to me is a much bigger factor that someone who's interested in purchasing an electric vehicle is going to look into more than the $150 a year. So, having said that, I will inform him that SaskPower applied for funding from Natural Resources Canada and has been accepted for funding to start to increase the number of charge stations that are available within our province, as well as the company Tesla, I believe, is investing some money in that initiative as well. And that, in my mind, is what's going to shift consumers into moving towards an electric vehicle more so than this fee that all road users are contributing to.
Thanks for the information from the minister. The cost of an EV is at a price point that's beyond many vehicles at this point right now. So as far as the fiscal impact to the province with the PST that's in place, if you're paying $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 more for that vehicle, certainly with the PST that's applied to a new vehicle purchase, the province already gets a significant chunk of change on that purchase, and you know, it should be looking to make sure that some of that infrastructure is in place. The minister mentions California, but doesn't identify that there's also been many incentives over the years on that front, and also, as the minister did identify, road infrastructure, charging stations and whatnot that really support EVs within that province, within that state. I'd be interested in what the minister's estimates are on as far as the number of EVs on the road in the out years. I know right now we have about 400 EVs. I'm wondering if she has any market data or assumptions that she's operating on at this point.
We don't.
Well, I guess again, I know that this is just sends a it's a purely political gesture here. The change in the law will have cost far more than the dollars that it's going to collect. As I identify already, anyone going out and buying an EV already pays a hefty price tag for that purchase, and the dollars flow back to the province of Saskatchewan on that front. And it's really what this legislation is consistent and in keeping with the Sask Party government's approach around climate change, which is to not be practical on these fronts, which is to fail to act in ways that are common sense and that allow us as a province to act in responsible ways, to reduce emissions in a way that we need to, but to create jobs and opportunities as well. So it's a disappointing approach from the government, not a surprise. We're well on the record here tonight. I guess have you, maybe if you could just share with us who you've heard from with respect to this legislation as far as concerns.
I heard from the association. I didn't know there was one, but there is, and several EV owners.
Well, we're certainly against this legislation. You're not taxing bikes, are you?
They don't have the same impact on the roadways. Fuel.
I don't have any further questions. I think it's well on the record that we're not supportive of this regressive piece of legislation.
We'll move on to Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 2. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 11. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 12, coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following. The Fuel Tax Amendment Act 2021. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill 34, the Fuel Tax Amendment Act 2021, without amendment. Mr. Scorpad moves. Is that agreed? Carried. We'll now move on to Bill number 35, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2021. We'll begin our consideration of Clause 1, short title. Mr. Halper, your opening comment.
The legislation, The Income Tax Amendment Act implements income tax initiatives to be announced as part of the budget. The legislation also repeals provisions which are no longer applicable, streamlining and clarifying other provisions, and amending provisions that have been requested by the Canada Revenue Agency to ensure consistent and effective administration of taxes. So the budget initiative that's in this change is it reintroduces the active families benefit, which provides eligible families with a benefit of up to $150 annually per child for fees paid to registered children and youth in sports, recreation, and cultural activities.
Mr. Witherspoon, do you have any questions?
No, thanks, Mr. Chair. The $150, up to $150, that's the maximum benefit here. That's a rebate, not a deduction, correct?
Yes.
Or credit?
It's a federal tax credit, and the maximum is $150 unless you're also eligible for the disability tax credit, and then you'll get another $50.
Okay. And the threshold around income, is it individual income at $60,000 or household income at $60,000?
Household income of $60,000.
And so if someone has a household income of $60,000, this benefit isn't something they'd be eligible for.
If they have greater than $60,000, yeah, of household income.
You know, I guess a couple things, you know, as $60,000 household income still leaves families often with a lot of tough choices and a lot of pressure. So the threshold certainly may be low. I've registered remarks in second reading or in adjourned debates with respect to just the importance of making sport and recreation and culture and the arts and music accessible to as many as we can. This is one measure that will aid some in doing so, and that's positive. But, you know, I think there's so much more government can do with very minimal dollars that can go a long ways in providing opportunities for young people. And I think those investments, I know it through my own life and work as a coach and a teacher and working with young people at risk. When young people are able to attach to healthy, sustainable recreation that includes sport or music or culture or arts, it has such a profound positive impact in their life that I think the return on investment, if you will, would be huge in making sport and recreation and all these things more accessible. This measure is a positive measure. It doesn't go the distance that we could with some other measures, but you know, I'm glad to see it back. It was in place by your government, then scrapped a few years back. Now it's back again. I guess just what went on there.
Well, fiscal pressures went on there when our revenues declined dramatically with what happened in oil and gas.
I think, you know, certainly households have endured financial pressures too. It's good to see this measure that will be utilized by many in the province in place. You know, consistency with that would be ideal. It allows families to plan from year to year with some predictability. Now, this bill, does it do a few other things here? Does it do something around the tech startup incentive and the emergency wage subsidy? No problem.
So what it does for the tech startup incentive, and I apologize because I didn't flip the page for the rest of my notes, it extends the program for 5 years, and that's in response to feedback that we received from the sector and the intent of making the program more effective, so that it extends it for 5 years, and the amount that's eligible technology startup business can raise under the program will double from $1 million to $2 million. The annual cap of $2.5 million per year is established on the maximum value of tax credits that can be issued, and the carry-forward period to claim an unused tax credit increases from 4 years to 7 years.
Just with respect to the measures around the tech sector startup incentive, this is such an exciting space and an impressive and dynamic space in the province, and so many, a lot of opportunity, a lot of really good people in this ecosystem making some really good things happen. So I'd like to recognize all those efforts, and so we would see this as an important measure and a very important sector to support. I guess I would just want to capture a bit as to the consultation that's gone on with this measure. It's important we get measures like this right and have those that are directly involved in the space involved in building measures like this.
So the request came from Innovation Saskatchewan, and they're the officials that would have done the consultation with the tech startup companies. It wasn't done by finance.
Well, I'd just like to put on the record a thanks to those that are involved as well. This is a dynamic industry. We want it to thrive in Saskatchewan. There is some competition on this front. We'd love to outperform. As much as we love our neighbors, we'd like to outperform, our provincial partners on this front. And with the kind of talent and people and organizations and structures that are in place, with a bit of support and nimble policy, we're in a good position to do that, which can, if we succeed, can create some exceptional opportunity for workers and businesses in this province. And I would invite anybody in that sector to, I've heard from many on this front already, and that this is an important measure, but I'd invite folks to stay engaged with their government, with the finance minister, with myself, with all members of the Assembly, to be talking to us about the kinds of tools and conditions that will allow this sector to thrive. Moving along just a bit, could you just identify again what the changes are around the emergency wage subsidy in this legislation?
Before I do that, I'll just, I was given the statistics, and I know I'd seen them, but I didn't have them in front of me. In speaking to what you just said of the effectiveness of this program, so $22 million in private investment has been attracted, leveraging $3.4 of investment for every $1 of the tax credit approved. 144 new jobs has been created by startup companies under this program. 184 investors and 62 tech companies have been approved to raise capital. So it is exciting. You asked on, now I have to go back to your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and just to add on to your comments there, I appreciate the numbers that you've shared and the return on investment. And it seems almost every day we're tracking some really positive things that are coming together out of this space, and so much as well. I'm proudly the agriculture critic as well. And when you look at ag tech and how we're positioned in Saskatchewan, it's exciting that we're positioned to take a world-leading role on this front and in that space. And I think ag tech is going to be a space specifically that's going to be exciting to watch in the year ahead. And I'd encourage those that are involved in it and to thank them for their efforts. But the question moved along to the changes around the federal emergency wage subsidy.
This amendment ensures that Saskatchewan's withholding rules do not apply to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So the Income Tax Act 2000 contains rules that provide for withholding taxes in accordance with Federal Income Tax Act. For example, employers are required to make withholdings of tax when making payments of wages or bonuses to employees. The change CRA is requested ensures that new federal subsections 153.101.02 to 153.1.04, which address the federal emergency wage subsidy, are not affected by SAS withholding rules. And this change comes into force retroactive to March 25th, 2020.
Thanks for that information, and I don't have any more questions on that piece. I know that this bill also repeals the film employment tax credit, and I know of course, the film employment tax credit was eliminated in 2012, I think, so about 8 years ago at this point, and so I guess I just would want to reiterate the huge concern with the choice at that time, which really did devastate an industry, drove away investment, drove away jobs, drove away Saskatchewan people, and an industry that has thrived in other jurisdictions, even right next door in Manitoba and right next door in Alberta, right across Canada. We've really seen a boon on this front. The Canadian dollar created conditions where investment really poured into Canada at this time and other provinces. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan was shut out because of something that was, really a regressive and short-sighted move that decimated an industry. And I recall back in 2012 when that move was made. We had a strong position as a province at the time. We had a strong balance. We had a strong financial position by way of revenues. Our resource sector was in good shape, and it just defied common sense that a government would choose to be less than more, or to present less opportunity to Saskatchewan people. And it, along with other choices, have caused our economy to be weakened, less resilient, and again, I know directly drove many people out of this province in the pursuit of employment and opportunity. So I would just leave with the minister, as I know she probably finds I'm a bit of a broken record on this front, but the opportunity still exists. This is something that should be revisited. We shouldn't be repealing it from the legislation. We should be rebuilding a film industry. Just across the lake, we have a world-class soundstage that sits largely idle that we could be putting to use, and the world would be lining up in this sector to film in Saskatchewan, bringing with them that investment that flows not just into the workers directly in film, but to the hospitality sector, which really booms from this sector. Our restaurants that are in a hard way right now, our hotel sector that's in a hard way, would really benefit from it, right through to the lumber yards and the vehicle sales, the car lots, and everybody, so many others that connect. And it's not just in Regina. It's certainly important to Regina, but the film industry was important to all of Saskatchewan. I often say it made us proud, but it also made us millions of dollars. And so I see it's being eliminated here tonight as far as being referenced in the Income Tax Act. It's unfortunate that there weren't measures in this budget to rebuild a film industry, create jobs, investment, make us proud, make us dollars. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We'll move on to Bill 35. Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 10, coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following: the Income Tax Act 2021. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill 35, the Income Tax Act 2021, without amendment. Mr. Jensen moves. Is that agreed? Carried. We'll now consider Bill 36, the Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2021. We will begin our consideration of Clause 1, short title. Mr. Harpar, your opening comments.
We have one more. So in essence, we're making some changes to strengthen our ability to collect tax on out-of-province businesses. Additional legislative changes are now proposed to ensure that as a vendor or a vendor's agent, marketplace facilitators, electronic distribution platform providers, and accommodation platform providers, when collecting the payment from Saskatchewan consumers, are also required to collect and remit the PST on all sales made through their marketplace or platform. And I know you asked some questions on that in the budget deliberations as well. This just strengthens it because some of them find a wiggle room to duck and dodge, if you will, and so we strengthened it further.
Mr. Witherspoon, question?
Thank you very much. Certainly this flows directly from the body of work that we were talking about earlier, and leveling the playing field, making sure that we have taxation fairness for Saskatchewan businesses, and that we're collecting from those out-of-province platforms. So is there anyone specific that this will capture that you could share with us that wasn't able to be captured before on the taxation front?
So this amendment, or this change in legislation, will just capture all third parties that are also selling goods on the platforms of the major e-platform distributors. So, you know, just imagine any of the major online retailers, they'll also have third-party providers who you can buy goods from. And because the legislation wasn't specific, those were falling through the cracks. And so, as the minister said, this ensures that those third-party providers are the platform manager is responsible for collecting tax on behalf of those third-party providers.
Thanks. That was my understanding in the read of the legislation. And as I mentioned before, I want to thank those that have been involved in the work in the ministry. It's important again to make sure that our retailers and our Saskatchewan small businesses and entrepreneurs, that they have a level playing field, and that it's not an unfair advantage that these large out-of-province e-commerce platforms have. So an important leveling of the playing field. The change around the vapor products, that's as a result of the other legislation that's been brought forward in the taxation of vapor products. Is that correct?
Correct.
I would look to the will of the committee. The folks know where we stand on this. I would maybe gauge. I'd be willing to bring an amendment right now to remove the PST off construction, labor, and restaurants. I'm all serious here. I mean, this is what this, you know, we could do something really impactful here. I'm looking to the members opposite. I'm one member in this committee. I'm looking to I can write it as a formal amendment, or you can signal to me whether or not you'd be supportive of that. It wouldn't be that difficult to vote as an amendment, would it?
Usually you do it in advance. I think you had
maybe just gauge the chair then, I guess, if you can kind of put the question, I'll fully get it written out here. Would there be support in me bringing forward this important measure for the construction industry and restaurants?
Is there any interest in bringing the amendment forward on the construction amendment? No?
Okay, so I don't hear the support there, and I'm one member, so obviously I would bring it and vote for it, but I'm looking to the members opposite who are telling me they won't support that. I do think that this would have been the kind of act that we could have brought forward, a really meaningful measure around the elimination of the PST on construction and the elimination of restaurant meals. I'll leave it there. I know the minister knows where we stand on this, and I know members opposite do as well. I don't have any further questions at this point.
Thank you. We'll move on to Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 6, Is that agreed? Carried. Clause 7, coming into force. Is that agreed? Carried. Her Majesty, by and with advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2021. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill 36, Provincial Sales Tax Amendment 2021, without amendment. Mr. Kiesek moves. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business for this evening. Minister Harper, do you have any final comments?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the committee members for being here tonight, for being here for very important estimates, as well as the passing of 5 pieces of legislation. For the member from the opposition party, I want to thank him for his questions. I think we probably covered more ground than many committees did. It rolled along fairly smoothly. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my Deputy Minister and all of the virtual officials that have been there behind the scenes, literally out of sight, giving us information. I truly have a fabulous team in the Ministry of Finance. I don't look at them as officials. I look at them as a team, and they have worked harder than ever through a very difficult year, where it was difficult to get the data that they needed when they're distanced themselves, and they got programs up and running in an amazing short period of time, and checks out to businesses across the province that needed that support right away. So I really, truly want to thank the officials in finance for their hard work.
Minister, Mr. Witherspoon, do you have any closing comments?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you first to the Minister. Thanks for your time here tonight. I know we had some differences, some strong differences in certain places, but what I do want to say thank you for is the timely responses and exchanges in this committee, and that makes these committees work in a more efficient, effective way. So I really appreciate that. And to the Deputy Minister and to your entire team, all those folks that have been working tirelessly throughout this year and that continue to and that are connected to that work here tonight during unprecedented challenges and at times where you've built programs in a way that have been quicker than probably have ever been built before because they needed to be built in that way. I just say thank you very much for your service to the people of Saskatchewan.
Thank you. I would ask a member to move the motion of adjournment. Minister Nierlin has moved. All agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned to Thursday, May 13th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
3-9.